Right, now, before we start, I just want to say a very few words from the chair. First of all, there's been some comment about the title of this process, Desire Lines. Some have described it as a bit fanciful, but I think it's a wonderful title. Desire lines, of course, are a recognised thing in urban geography. They are the paths that people find for themselves, which aren't the paths necessarily which are dictated to them top down in terms of what's been tarmacked and where they're supposed to go. The idea behind the concept of desire lines is that people can often find faster ways and better ways and perhaps even cheaper ways to get to where they want to go if they ignore those top-down solutions and go the ways they want to go. And the converse of that, of course, is that policy works better if it follows the desire lines of the people who are walking the path and doesn't try to resist them or impose solutions which don't suit what they're trying to do. So it's a wonderful name for what we're trying to do here, which is to find the desire lines of creative people in Edinburgh, creative community, and all the organisations and all of those who care about the creative future of Edinburgh in order to try and help the City Council in its policy process to go along the paths of least resistance and to have the most creative support in what they're trying to do with what we all know is limited resources. Secondly, I want to say a quick word about Edinburgh itself, because it's a city that many people hate and many people love, and most of us love and hate in equal measure. But it is a city of contradictions, and I think it's something we have to hold in our minds the whole time when we're talking about Edinburgh, that it is a great cultural centre, and yet it's a city with an unparalleled record of messing up and making poor decisions as well. And so it has these kind of double faces, you know, the precipitous city, the dark and the light, the foolish and the brilliant, the absolutely beautiful and the unbelievably daft, all in the same city. And, you know, when we're talking about it, I think we have to kind of bear that contradictory character in mind, and remember that for every statement we make about there's going to be something that proves the exact opposite. And then finally, in this session, I think the idea here is to bring a bit of creative energy to bear on what could be a very bureaucratic policy-making process, particularly with the financial pressures that local authorities are now under. We want to hear about everybody's problems and everybody's issues, but for every issue that you raise, I would like you to be thinking also about creative solutions, and if possible, creative solutions that are not going to cost an absolute mint, because there is not a mint to be had. So if everyone sort of speaks in that spirit, i.e. trying to generate a solution for every problem that you raise, then I think that will really help us to have a really positive and creative evening, as well as one that really rigorously identifies some of the issues that the city really faces. And with that, I'm absolutely delighted now to move on to our first session. We've started a bit late because so many people wanted to be in here tonight, but from now on I'm going to try and be pretty strict about the lengths of the sessions being exactly as timed here, so we're running about 10 minutes late. And I'm absolutely delighted for our first session, which is about divided city ? The audience for the arts in Edinburgh. Our first sort of provocative speaker, who'll speak for 4 or 5 minutes on that subject, is Linda Irvine, who is Strategic Programme Manager for NHS Lothian. Linda.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here tonight, and I have no watch, so I'm going to try and guess 4 minutes in my head. I'm going to talk a bit about art and what it means for people with mental health problems from my own experience of being Strategic Programme Manager for Mental Health and Wellbeing for NHS Lothian, and our participation in the Scottish National Mental Health Arts and Film Festival for the last 8 years. So I'm a Programme Manager for Mental Health and Wellbeing. What does that mean? That means my job is to develop strategy and to make sure it's implemented to improve the mental health and wellbeing of the population of Lothian. So that includes thinking about how do you promote positive mental health, how do you prevent ill mental health, and importantly, how do you care and treat for people who have mental health problems. And it's a strategy that's about all life stages, so from pre-birth through to death. I'm also speaking as a citizen of Edinburgh and more recently as a citizen of Leith for the last 15 years. I think you need to live there a long time before you become a true citizen. So we began a few years ago to think about the importance of art in terms of promoting people's mental health and well-being. Our sense of belonging is our Lothian strategy, which the very title gives you a clue in itself. We spoke to a lot of people when we were developing the strategy and continue to speak to a lot of people. And what people tell us time and time again is it's our sense of identity, their sense of belonging, their sense of being connected to communities, to individuals, to families, to social supports that's really, really important to them. And what better way to do that is through the medium of art. So for the individuals that have worked with us and continue to work with us through the festival, people tell us that being involved in the Arts and Film Festival really increases their self-understanding, promotes self-esteem and locus of control, facilitates self-directed therapeutic processes. So how do they understand better their mental health and well-being, their mental illness through the medium of arts? Opportunities for self-evaluation, artistic development, and the very positive effect it can have on relationships with friends and families. So people get to have a different identity for that 3 weeks during the actual festival and all the preparation that leads up to that. Improved communication skills, lots of challenges and difficulties, but ultimately really increases people's sense of resilience and sense of self. For the partner agencies that we work with, and we've worked with about 25 to 30 partners over the last 7 to 8 years, it's really helped to build social and emotional capital that we feel benefits the City of Edinburgh as a whole. There's been lots of training opportunities for people, lots of learning opportunities, and lots of really progressive participation in a huge, big range of activities. And importantly, I think the social support that people get from being involved in the festival is absolutely enormous, and the way that people then self-define themselves following the festival. For our communities, whether they're defined by geography, by sexual identity, by ethnic origin, or by mental health condition, it's meant that there's been lots of different cross-communities coming together and lots of cross-community networking. And from that, opportunities for travel, for research, for planning, and for managing projects. And importantly, a number of people that have worked with us over the years have actually gone to venues in our amazing city that they've probably never been in before. So places that become quite shut off, that can be quite close places for people, suddenly become opened up because people are seeing as they've got a right to come to these venues, they've got a right to participate. So that whole sense of building different senses of places and belonging within the community and across the capital city. I think we often get questioned about the integrity of the art or the value of the art, and there's a really nice quote that I like to reflect on by Roy Adsack, the British photographer and sculptor, who said that good art is not what it looks like, but what it does to us. Over the last week, I asked a number of people through a very quick, unscientific survey monkey what it meant to them to be involved in the Scottish Mental Health Arts and Film Festival. And the words that came back, I asked them in one word, were words like inspired, involved, empowered, proud, creative, engaged, united, and included. I also asked them if they would like to be more a formal partner in the calendar, Edinburgh's amazing calendar of festivals, and what would that mean? And people thought that this would be a process of validating what they do. It would be important to be a part of the Vital programme. It would give a bigger profile. It would also focus on people with mental health problems and focusing on what they can do as opposed to what they can't do. And it made people feel that they would then be a necessary part of the city's cultural life. And one person summed it up as just a fantastic opportunity. So I want to finish by just saying a quote from Thomas Mann, who said that art is to the community what the dream is to the individual. Thank you.
That's fantastic. That's a great account of people, completely finding, a new part of themselves by being involved in an arts event. Do you think, because there's a lot of people here tonight who are involved in organisations that stage, the arts, theatres, venues, people who run music events and so on. Do you think when people are involved in a process like that, it also alters their relationship with the sort of arts life that's already going on? Do they feel more empowered and more able to take part in this sort of existing?
Absolutely. I think my point about people sometimes have had very limited life opportunities and have maybe not had a lot of the opportunities I've certainly had when I was growing up in Edinburgh. So a way of being able to open up people's minds again and being able to, some people described it as becoming like childlike again and be able to explore aspects of your personality and and your sense of self that have maybe been quite shut off from you. So I think the opportunity to work with people whose life is art and who stage events all the time, the learning from that is huge, hugely empowering for people.
Thanks very much, Linda. Sadly, Rob Munn, who was supposed to be the former councillor from the Leith area, who was supposed to be the other speaker in this session, isn't here, but that means that there's tons of space in this session for people to make their own points. Now, the title of the session is The Audience for the Arts in Edinburgh, and literally, if you have any observations, either about what Linda's said, or about problems or issues or potentials in developing the audience for the arts in Edinburgh that you have experience of, please feel free to ask a question or to make a point now. It's a very important issue for Edinburgh, I think, because it's a city where we're often faced with the accusation that our main, high-profile arts events, such as the festival, are only for those and such as those. So anyone like to kick off this discussion about the audience for the arts in this city? Not a soul. Should we just move on to the next session then? I feel that that can't be the case. Right, there's somebody up the back there. Is that Tony? Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Do you want me to stand up? No?
Yes, please.
Oh, do you?
I think because it's such a big room, it helps if people
Do you want me to sing as well?
Yes, do sing. I'll just introduce this man since I happen to know him. It's Tony Reekie, the just about to be outgoing director of the Imaginate, the wonderful children's festival that they have in Edinburgh every May.
I've never been introduced as the just about to be outgoing. I feel a bit daft about being the first one to speak. It was about the idea of this idea of the divided city. I grew up in Edinburgh, and I always had that thing that the worst part of the year and the event that I hated most growing up was the International Festival and the Fringe. Because if you grow up in Edinburgh, that's the time that means that the summer holidays finished and you have to go back to school. And it always struck me as quite a good way to somehow comment on what actually happens in Edinburgh, that you actually have a time where lots and lots of young people potentially could be really, really engaged with something, and then what you do is you have the biggest arts event in the world at the time when they all have to bugger off back to somewhere else. And it's always struck me as being someone who's now on the other side of that those divisions still exist for many people who live in Edinburgh. And it's that interesting thing, because I have the chance with the work that I do to travel through different parts of the world and to visit cities that seem to be much more fluid in the way that artists and arts organisations engage with people culturally throughout their cities, and how people seem to be much more fluid in the way that they actually engage with the artists. And it seems to be that thing about artists and arts organisations moving away from their spaces, their festivals, their buildings, and actually engaging much, much more effectively than I think perhaps Edinburgh does with people in their city and being where they are culturally at, rather than, in a sense, a lot of the time waiting for them to come to us. And that idea of community centres and all the different spaces that people use culturally, and how we as arts organisations and artists, I feel, need to be engaging much, much more where people are at, and then encouraging them to be sometimes where we're at as well, and trying to find a much more fluid way. And if we're talking about that thing about money, and the way that that's going to be becoming a lot more difficult, there are places out there, community centres and places like that are deeply cultural spaces that are going to be going through the same difficulties as well. And that idea that we can find more alliances to create really, really exciting things seems to be a way that starts to get over that divided nature that sometimes I think we suffer from.
Yep. Thanks very much, Tony. Well, that's something that you know, is a very powerful comment about the arts in Edinburgh, that people often say that the festivals and the big arts organisations here should be reaching out more, or should be travelling out more, or should be moving into the spaces where people really are. But then that raises the question of what's wrong with the spaces where art's taking place now? Why do they have a sort of exclusive atmosphere? Are they too expensive? Are they in the wrong place? Any thoughts about any of that, anyone? Yep, here's Robert in the front row. This is Robert McDowell, the owner of Summerhall.
the festival doesn't need to reach out. Everybody knows about it.
Thank you, Robert. Yep. So what's the problem then? Right, someone over here with a red hat. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mara Menzies, a storyteller. And actually there are some people who don't know about the festival. Down in Leith a few years ago, I met a 16-year-old girl who was very interested in poetry, and I was telling her about speaking about the book festival. She didn't know it was on, and it was in the middle of August, so actually there are some people who don't know that the festival is on. And I think that there's a huge amount that the larger, more established venues should be doing in terms of reaching out to people, because in terms of when people feel that there is nothing there for them, then they do feel excluded from them. I run a small company, Toto Tales, that does it's bringing African stories to life, and I know that from working with some of the African communities in and around Edinburgh, there is really no reason for them to go to the theatre because there is nothing that represents their cultural heritage. I mean, that's not to say that all Africans want to go and see African shows. However, every now and again, it might be quite nice to see a familiar story, a familiar face on the stage, or for them in some way to feel that there is a space for them to also begin to try and tell their stories. But currently, right now, in the grand scheme of things, there isn't that space for that particular community. And I'm interested in all sorts of different stories again, but I just think that there's more work that needs to be done there. I've got somebody here who in a few years' time I want him to feel absolutely connected to the city, and at this stage I do my little bit, but I think that there's more to be done. And I think for the families of that particular community as well, there is a need for them to see the arts as their place, because right now their children they're not encouraged to enter the arts, and that's something that needs to be worked on amongst that community themselves, between themselves anyway. But I think that's all I'll say for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So all sorts of different kinds of possible exclusions going on here, depending on people's, the groups they belong to. I mean, you talked about issues around mental health, you know, groups with various different issues which might make them feel excluded. And of course, the biggest one of all, typically in a city like Edinburgh, being class. Yep, somebody in the second row there, thank you.
Hello. If you're talking about exclusion, can I just put in a word for visually impaired people? Because people who go to the theatre can often see the signers at the front, but visually impaired people go to the theatre as well. And I represent an organisation called Audio Description Association Scotland. A lot of people don't know we exist. RNIB tell us that visually impaired people often feel excluded, often feel isolated. Going to the theatre, going out with family and friends can be a wonderful thing. And could I just make a plea, because if you look at the RNIB website and realise just how many people are going to be losing their sight as they get older, and it's a massive audience for people who are looking for sales, because we're not just talking about these people who are visually impaired, we're talking about their family, their friends, and I'd just like to say, please remember that there are people out there who find it just that bit more difficult to get to the theatre, and any help would be appreciated. Thank you. Can
I just ask you, is there any institution in Edinburgh that you think is doing well on the audio description front, that really takes an interest in it and is trying to...
I'm very glad you said that, because the Festival Theatre have been absolutely brilliant, and they've worked really hard with us. They also they give their premises for our AGM. They also encourage the Capital Theatre Group, which is run and organised by visually impaired people, and they do a tremendous amount, and they're just so good. In fact, we're going to a little event next week that they've run for us, just as a wee thank you, and I just can't speak too highly of them. Thank you.
Great. Right, so now I'm beginning to see lots of hands coming up now. There's somebody there on the aisle, and then Virginia here in the front row. Yeah. Chat with the scarf. Is that my mic that's making? Yeah. Do you want me to use the hand mic, or? Oh,
I need to put it on. That's it. I'm Stephen. I work at a place called Forest Centre Plus. So talking about access to arts, I was recently in Spain, in Valencia, and we went to this place that had been funded and been given loads of money by the EU to set up as a multi-art centre in not the most affluent part of Valencia. And one of the problems they were having, that no one was using this space. It was an incredible space, a great library full of art journals and all sorts, incredible recording facilities. But no one was using the space, and it was very much a top-down project by run by sort of the council in Valencia there. And they'd failed to include anyone in the local area, anyone in the local community about what they really wanted to see happening in that space. And I think that's definitely something to be aware of when, talking about getting people in to access the arts, is actually, consulting before what people actually want to get involved in. And a part of that as well, I think that one of the divisions is the sort of social boundaries to being involved in arts. And, maybe some people feel intimidated, like they maybe don't have the education, and that education and outreach is obviously really important to getting people engaged and wanting to come to events, especially in a city like Edinburgh, which is quite a segregated city. I'm not sure if you asked me to think of some ways to maybe improve that. I don't have them yet, but highlighting the problems to start, I suppose.
It says on. Good. Right. Could we have a mic for Virginia in the front row here? It's Virginia Radcliffe from the Lickety Spit Children's Company, who work at North Edinburgh Arts Centre a lot.
We're the resident children's theatre company at North Edinburgh Arts. I think there should be children's theatre companies in every community in Edinburgh, particularly the outlying communities. And our work doesn't just appeal to children, but it puts children at the centre of a very broad audience of all ages. And being in touch with our children is one of the biggest ways, I think, that we can really unite our communities. Interestingly, I spoke to somebody recently locally and said, that North Edinburgh Arts is an amazing place. We've just had regeneration. We've got an amazing, huge garden that's just won a big award. In fact, the Festival Theatre has been doing fantastic outreach, coming out and offering free tickets to Singing in the Rain and all sorts, and Warhorse, and doing drama workshops and puppet workshops out in the schools. There is some really interesting, exciting work going on to connect communities like that up, but there just can't really be enough, I think. And I was very interested that a local person said to me recently, well, the trouble is it's called an arts centre. That word art puts people off. And I think that's a real indication of really how important it is that people get out into those areas, and also that the council puts more money into making those areas beautiful. Because Muir House, it's got some regeneration going on at the moment, but it's still very bleak, and the cleaners aren't there near it as often as they are in St Andrew's Square. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to say is that they also have an amazing project called Zoo Arts, which takes children into the posh art galleries. And I think that that some of those galleries are very accessible, and places like the Festival Theatre and so on. And some of them are very alienating, and people couldn't go and buy a cheap enough cup of tea. And tickets for the festival are too expensive for most people in Edinburgh. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I mean, it always strikes me that there's a kind of paradox in this, that people gather in gatherings like this and say, well, there are lots of people who don't feel that this is for them. They don't feel that the arts that's going on is something that they can really join in with. But when you start proposing solutions, the solutions always tend to be top down. They tend to be like your big arts centre in Valencia, or it's something which is great in Pilton, but which is called an arts centre, which in itself is enough to put people off. And I just wondered whether there's anyone in the room who feels that they're kind of doing something or being something that actually begins to resolve that, that tension between doing things, from a sort of official perspective or an organisational perspective, and at the same time somehow responding to the creativity of the community itself so that it feels it has some ownership of what's happening. Who's that there? Oh, it's Donald. Yeah, hello. That's Donald Smith from the Scottish Storytelling Centre.
Hi, yeah, I mean, I think that places like Leith and Portobello are examples in Edinburgh now where people have taken local ownership of what's going on in arts and culture. And I think it's quite interesting that we slightly missed out on what Linda was saying at the beginning, which was she was articulating not the arts are good for you, but values about belonging, about identity, about connection, about empowerment. And I think that actually that's the unifying agenda, however it's delivered and however it's owned, that actually everybody is signed up for here. But I think that, you know, the future of this absolutely lies with the alliances that have been mentioned, but also the lead where communities are taking ownership and people in those communities are taking ownership because they are connecting those key issues in their own lives with a sense of creative engagement and expression. And that's not the arts top down. And I think that's happening in our city, and we need to get round and support it.
Do you fancy an example?
Well, I was just saying the two communities that I think, you know, that I have experienced where I think that the ownership of the arts have been taken locally are Leith and Portobello, which incidentally have no major arts institutions or facilities or venues in their communities.
I know that we have plenty of people from Leith here tonight. Is that an overly optimistic picture of what's happening in Leith? Or it certainly seems pretty lively from, yeah.
I just want to introduce myself because we've recently moved to Leith.
Sorry, it's just such a big...
I set up Edinburgh Contemporary Crafts a couple of years ago, and we've grown really quickly. So I suppose there's two things that I want to talk about. Firstly, we've got a real supportive community around us now. It started off with just myself in a tiny little shop, and over 2 years we've gone, we now have 47 makers in the workshops, and last term we had over 120 people on our courses from across the community, across ages, disabilities, all sorts. And we've recently just moved into the Abbey Mount Tech-Based Centre in Leith. What I was thinking when you were discussing how we can avoid the sort of top-down and not involving the community, one of the reasons that we've been so successful is because I've done it with absolutely no money. So it's been constantly putting calls out to people who can help. We've had so many volunteers. I worked on a community project before setting up the centre, and lots of the unemployed people that I worked with came and volunteered the time to paint things, rip up carpets, knock down walls and stuff like that. And that kind of community carries on to exist. There's a huge amount of support for us. The problem I have right now, though, is we've got to a stage where it's a success on no money, a tiny, tiny budget, and now I'm struggling to get the financial support and the support from the council. We're in a council building right now that we need to sort of take it to the next level and celebrate the success that we've had so far and kind of continue to build on that, because there's only so far you can go using the work of volunteers.
Well, yeah, that's it. That's another thing. But the volunteer element can be tremendously important in that sense of ownership, though. Is that part of what's happened in the SMHAFF, the Scottish Mental Health Arts and Film Festival?
Definitely, I think what's interesting about our festival is it's funded by NHS Lothian, and some people look a bit confused when I say that. But we consider the arts and health are side by side. And I guess the whole festival, our contribution is probably about £15,000 a year. And from that, we've been able to put on about 40 events. And some of that is down to people collaborating and volunteering. But a lot of it is just about making connections and collaborating. And making new connections with the existing arts organisations and infrastructure. Is there anybody, dare I ask, because I can see a few faces in here, who's running a large organisation which is trying to break down some of these barriers, who could give us an insight into what the possibilities and the difficulties are? Yep, Robert.
I think I'm sort of running a large organisation. It sort of runs itself, and creative people really have to be trusted to run things. This thing about barriers, look, I think we always have to test our assumptions about these things. There's been very interesting studies were done which showed that no matter how much money and how much effort we put into things, the number of people who are going to go out to culture are only going to be increased by about 10% at best. there is a limit. What we are about, going out to culture, is not what everybody wants or is interested in at any and all times in their lives. And what we do is not for everybody either. The stuff that is for everybody, they get it on television and in their home entertainment centers. That's the crap that we don't want to be producing in what we do in going out to culture. So the idea that we have to beat ourselves up to try and be all-inclusive and to contrive at what will please and entertain people is absolutely not what we do here. We don't want to entertain people. We don't want to do what we think that the people think they want. We do what we think is good, what we think or what we hope is good, what we hope will be better. And if we think it's good, then we hope and we believe that lots of other people will think that. And it doesn't worry us whether it's 90%, 70%, 80%, 10% is good enough.
Yeah, I mean, the certainly second-guessing what audiences want is never a recipe for great art. But there's another way of looking at it, which is about unleashing the creativity of whole communities so that everyone feels able to get up and get off their sofas, as a lot of people said during the referendum campaign, and do something other than watching the stuff on the telly. Was there a hand here? Yeah.
My name's John Ennis, and I set up Gayfield Creative Spaces at the top of Leith Walk just about 8 months ago. You were looking for examples of small ideas. We thought long and hard about what threshold meant and what locality means, and we thought that trying to understand that first and foremost, together with all the other things like international picturing that we're trying to do as well, was really important. So we've gone to the local school, St Mary's, working up a small project with their junior school and their senior school for Gayfield Square. And it really has unleashed what you're saying. It's unleashed enthusiasm amongst the staff, enthusiasm amongst the pupils, of course, and it's not happened. It mightn't happen for 15 months. Lead time, funding, and the brief are all my big 3 learning curves in the last year, but just a small intervention like that seems to have galvanized a locality in a very positive way.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yep, another one in the back there. Yeah. Oh, did she not say her name? Sorry.
She's fantastic.
Thank you, Louise. Thanks.
Hi there, and I was also just going to say hi, John. He contacted me on LinkedIn a little while ago, and I've not got back to him yet. My name's Duncan Bremner. I represent an organisation called Citizen Curator. Myself and Morvern Cunningham, who's speaking later from Leith Late, are involved in a little project trying to map a little bit of the cultural diversity and all the creative opportunities that are happening in Leith. I just wanted to come in with one point in particular. The attitudes, barriers are attitudinal. Some of this is that it's not for you, and some of this is not for us. It comes on both sides, and I think it's demonstrated tonight.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I'm still waiting for that voice from one of our big cultural institutions about how easy or difficult it is. Okay, I'm seeing Duncan. We've got very little time left for this session now, but here's Nick and Duncan, and Nick first, thanks. Nick Barley from the Book Festival, thanks.
I didn't really want to speak tonight, but since you're asking for a voice from one of I run the Book Festival, and just to say that the headlines that the festival grabs in summertime sometimes conceal the kind of work that's going on behind the scenes and below, under the radar. 12,000 school kids that we bring from across Scotland to the Book Festival site, and then something like 60 events that we run in schools, community centres, libraries across Scotland. I could go on and on about the work that's happening, and it's incredibly important to us to reach out to audiences. And I completely hear the woman who said about somebody who'd never heard of the Book Festival, and of course that cuts me deep. But it's not for the want of trying, and so the point of tonight for me is to try to reiterate that we're all in this together, and we're all working to try to reach out as widely as we can, but it's not for the want of trying.
From the festival in King's Theatre.
Yes, just picking up on the point that Robert made earlier, we programme we don't program to, we program quality. We're not trying to program entertainment for the masses, but we do reach out to people in the way that the lady at the front talked about earlier on. We've got people going out doing outreach work and trying to get to audiences that wouldn't normally come to our venues. And we're doing that in terms of the access issues that were mentioned earlier as well, in terms of getting people who are with visual impairments, audio impairments. So we are reaching out to try and get new audiences into the venues. I think the one area that our venue and others probably don't do very well on is reaching to the ethnic minorities in the city. Certainly the people I see when I walk down Nicholson Street or through Leith, where I also live, are not the people that I see in our venues, and I think we probably need to do more in that respect. And just one final point, that the gathering we've got tonight, I think, is the start of that bottom-up process of looking at what the big ideas are that would transform our city and make it a more exciting cultural city to live in.
Yeah, great. Now, there was one more hand in the back. Yeah, is that Sarah? Yeah. Hello.
Hello, I'm Sarika Carey, Director of the Edinburgh Art Festival. We probably appear one of the very large cultural institutions in the city, although in fact we're a very small team of 3 staff, and we're the youngest of Edinburgh's summer festivals, founded just 10 years ago. But one of the things we've been doing over the last 4 years is deliberately commissioning artists to make new work for public sites in the city. Some of those commissions have been in collaboration with organisations like the Fruit Market and have resulted in really fantastic permanent legacies for the city, like the Scotsman Steps. Some of them have been much more temporary interventions in abandoned buildings. We work with a burnt-out watchtower in Calton Graveyard, and most recently with the police box on Easter Road. But what we found really fantastic about that programme is that it's firstly reaching entirely new audiences for the festival, for the visual arts. But more critically, those people are telling us that having been to visit one of those commissions, they're now more likely to come into one of the many great institutions, many great art galleries that our city hosts. And I think one of the greatest challenges for Edinburgh in some ways is our history. I think certainly in the case of the visual arts sector, many of the galleries and spaces are in these very grand historic buildings, which are incredibly intimidating, I think, for people who've not been brought up going into those spaces and haven't had that sense of ownership and that sense that they have a right to access that. 99% of our program is entirely free at the point of access, but I think the architecture is very often the greatest challenge because it's intimidating. And I think that by bringing work out to people to allow them to engage is one step towards breaking that down. And the other critical thing, I think, is bringing people in very young, because I think if you're brought up going to those spaces, they're much less intimidating when you're older.
Okay, I'm just going to take one more, and then
Hi there, I'll keep this short. I'm Ali Bowden, I'm from the City of Literature Trust, and I just wanted to say something about libraries. I don't work for libraries, but it's about libraries, and that we have this network of them across the city. They're based deep in our communities. They exhibit art, they work with the festivals, they work with community groups across the city, they run volunteer programs, they have a huge range of language resources. This is where you'll find your Urdu books and everything else. So I think that you asked about organisations, the large organisations who actually are making a real effort to do it well. I'd say libraries. And I think we need to be careful to support and look after them, because they're an existing network across the city of really committed and passionate people that are there that we could build on rather than have it reduced or cut.
Yep. Thank you. I think that's a brilliant point to finish on. That's excellent. Very true. I think we've just had some kind of Save Your Libraries sort of week or day or something, and I think their importance is absolutely huge. And I remember 100 years ago in history, when I was involved in the Charter for the Arts in Scotland process, how strongly the libraries came through as a kind of key area where communities can come together and access all these different things, and be, you know, and they are accessible. People love them and feel comfortable in them, which is great. Okay, well, that has given you a sense of what this evening's going to be like. So much to talk about, such big issues, so many different points of view, but at least we're making a start on sketching out where the issues and the possibilities are. I want you to give a huge thank you to Linda for kicking off that session so brilliantly for us. Thank you. And we're moving straight on to our next session, which is about the arts and the city economy. And our speaker in this session is going to be James Anderson of Baillie Gifford, who's a trust manager at the Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust and a man with a passion for the arts. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Joyce. This is rather disconcerting because whenever I do investment presentations, nobody listens at all. You seem to have things like questions here, which I'm not really used to. A self-indulgent start, but I hope it's to explain at least a background to why I do feel strongly about this. And that self-indulgent start is that, to be honest, what we're talking about as culture here is, to my mind, just about the only thing that can actually help us invest well enough that we can compete in the global market. I'm in a bad mood because I've got to spend the next 3 days in London. And I assure you, everybody in London thinks if they mimic what's in the FT, if they just listen to a bunch of stockbrokers and investment banks, they will have the answers. And I can assure you, nothing is more wrong. Equally, I doubt if any of my colleagues are here, but if they were, I would still be happy to say that fund managers who only talk to each other are the most, not just dullest people in the world, but they are profoundly unlikely to be successful. Now, I think it's through meeting brilliant people in a much broader perspective, many of them through the festivals and the like, that we can hope, and then it's still only hope, to do well. Now, that doing well, in turn, translates into being able, and I don't mean this in any sententious sense, to give something back to the societies you are in, because, you know, it seems to me one of the tragedies of the last 30 years is that we've all carved the world up into little bits. And we all assume that people in finance should only be interested in narrow payoffs, that there is no such thing as society, and that we aren't all linked together. Once you indulge yourself and bought a few things you like, and I buy myself nice bottles of Italian wine, actually the satisfaction comes from incorporating it with society. So I think there's a huge circle here. We can only do well because of what we get from the broadly defined cultural instincts that Edinburgh has and history that it has. But in turn, that means we should give back to it properly, not in any reward sense or cynical sense, but because we are all deeply tied back together. I then heard lots of talk, as I thought I probably would, about money. Now, I don't really believe that there is a shortage of money in Edinburgh. Now, at some levels, that's not quite true. Another institution, an American university, which I'm involved with, has its own pet billionaire in the case of Michael Bloomberg, who literally gives them billions. Now, there aren't people like that in Edinburgh. But beyond that, there are an awful lot of very rich people with very successful businesses. I do believe it's a difficult challenge from all the councils and the like. Of course, I believe they ought to do more, but I think essentially there are many businesses in this city which don't contribute in an intelligent way to what's going on. And I think this perception that Edinburgh doesn't have the resources to do it is plain wrong. I think that probably only requires a degree of acceptance from the other side around that we are part of society. Probably my most depressed moment about any of this in the last few years was at a book festival event when somebody who does a huge amount for Edinburgh culture in Scotland, indeed in general, was asked, what he ought to think of Baillie Gifford as sponsors, etc. of this. And his reply was that we should be plundered like Egyptians. I don't think that's fair. I think if there are those of us who are trying to contribute to what's going on, yeah, we may be lucky and fortunate, but I think equally we should try and help each other, and the constructiveness should be the other way around too. What would I like to see happen? Well, I think the first thing is that we should be ever more trying to be deeply international and global in what we do. You know, one of the reasons why we have such troubles is the extraordinary levels of insularity and xenophobia that exists in so much of Britain, and particularly around London. And I think that, you know, that is an absolutely critical task and something that most of the festivals do profoundly well already. Is it festivals? Well, no, it's also engagement. I think that there is a lack, both at the formal festivals and throughout the year, of engagement with the performers, with the audiences, with broader audiences, that there ought to be. And I think that's something that over the next 10 years, it would be great if more people worked on. You know, I think there was something very moving about the fact that so many people did get involved in the whole referendum issue from that point of view. And I think replicating that would be great. I think that there does need to be something about trying to make this more year-wide. Now, obviously, if I go back to my starting point, I would like to see that as part of a sort of culture of ideas about what's going on. One of the ideas that we've been talking about at work is whether we should effectively run a Talk to a Genius program, that we would try and get genuinely world-class intellects from whatever field, and the more irrelevant almost the better, because your insights always come from surprising sources, to come year-round and see whether you can make that into something that does generate interest, because plainly you wouldn't just do it for yourself if that was happening. So I think that this is such a strange city in many ways. You know, we have these fantastic attributes, but we're all trying to undermine each other as the process goes along. And I think we need to just accept that there are always going to be differences of emphasis, but there are the resources, the brilliance, the interest, as this room shows, to make something much more of it. And in that level, Edinburgh can be one of the truly greatest cities of the world. Thank you.
Do you think it's do you think it's widely accepted among the sort of Edinburgh business community that without the sort of very, you know, high profile and powerful cultural image that the city has, that it really wouldn't be as successful a city, even in practical terms, never mind all the other benefits of having a vibrant cultural life? Do you think it's widely understood?
Oh, do I think it's widely understood? I'm not sure, but I'm absolutely certain that it needs to be understood. You know, we couldn't, and I don't think this is unduly selfish, we couldn't survive unless we could attract people from throughout the world to come and work with us. You can do that because of the reputation Edinburgh has. I've got a daughter at University of Manchester at the moment, and you know, frankly, for a city that invented the Industrial Revolution, the chances of being able to get people, unless they're footballers, to come and work there and contribute to the society is absolutely minimal. So I'm sure it is huge. Am I sure that all the businesses in Edinburgh that ought to be concerned about this are concerned? No.
Well, I think Manchester is rapidly on the up and up, though, isn't it, as a destination? But that's not. And that's not unconnected, though, with its efforts to reinvent itself as a cultural and social and very vibrant city in that respect, as well as one with a great industrial history. I mean, the Manchester International Festival is a very interesting model, I think, for something that is not the same as anything that Edinburgh does, but has some interesting features. So, you know, the idea that culture is important to cities is very widespread and very much discussed among people like yourselves who are involved in it, and among people like most of us here tonight who have some interest in the cultural sector. But I just sometimes wonder how much it's understood beyond that sector. This session is called The Arts and the City Economy. So if anyone has any thoughts about how that case is to be made. If anyone can even imagine what Edinburgh's city economy would look like without the arts, then I think now is the time to speak. Yes, somebody in the middle there.
Yeah, Kenneth Wardrop, I'm a freelance tourism consultant in Edinburgh and have a long association with cultural tourism in the city. And I think you've got to tie these two things together, tourism and culture, very, very strongly in terms of the economy of this city. You know, people are looking for an authentic, real experience that will differentiate a place and make it distinctive. And the cultural offer in Edinburgh definitely makes that in terms of a tourism destination. And it is very much tied to the whole live, work, study, and invest agenda. You can't differentiate the things. So in terms of place marketing, it's our ace in our card, our cultural tourism, and absolutely economy and the arts are tied together. That's my perspective.
Thank you very much. I mean, do you ever worry? Hang on, keep the microphone a minute. I mean, are you worried at all that, I mean, there are pressures for whatever reason. You're quite right, there's plenty of money, James, but for whatever reasons, local authority budgets are likely to be declining rather than improving over the next few years. I mean, are you concerned that it's not enough understood that without...
Absolutely, it's a concern, because if you don't get it right, we'll lose the tourism strength of Edinburgh as well. They're so linked, and, as quite rightly said, in terms of attracting talent to this city, we've got 70,000 international students, 70,000 students, of whom about 17,000 are international students, and they're attracted to Edinburgh because of the cultural offer. They're attracted to Edinburgh first, before they're attracted to the academic institutions. And I would say that having, you know, to dismiss Manchester is very dangerous. They're just about to invest in a huge cultural quarter in Manchester. Where's the equivalent investment in Edinburgh? I don't see it in Edinburgh. You know, so we sneer at Manchester at our peril here in Edinburgh. We should not be complacent in this city. And we should be we know that the festivals from the recent impact studies that have been done are the equivalent of a Commonwealth Games every year for the city. So we need to be investing in our cultural arts festivals as well, and not take those for granted.
Can I ask you one last question, because it's interesting to have someone who's got a tourism perspective. Would you agree with James that I mean, is there anything sensible that could be done to kind of even Edinburgh's sort of cultural year out a bit so that it's not so concentrated in August? Or do you think that's the kind of linchpin around which everything else revolves?
Well, I mean, everybody knows that the strength of the August festival, or the summer festivals, is that incredible firmament that happens of them all happening at the same time. So don't tamper with that. But undoubtedly, there's more space in the calendar. We're already a city break year-round destination. We just need a fill-up at certain times of the year, and the quietest time is from January through to March. So anything we can be doing from January through to March, and invest in our winter festivals. Our winter festivals have transformed this city. Don't forget what it was like before we had Hogmanay and before we had Christmas. The hotels weren't full in December. So it's Christmas festival, the winter festival. So you know, you kind of take it for granted, but we live in a very, very competitive world in terms of tourism. You know, if we're not out there, you know, fighting our corner constantly, then we will quickly slip down the rankings.
Brief reply. I really don't like this idea of sneering at other places. The point that I'm trying to make, which I think is important, is that if you are to have great businesses thriving in the city, which is unusual from that aspect, then you need to have a ferment of ideas. And I think we are incredibly lucky from that point of view. We try and stress that.
That's great,
Malcolm Fraser, excuse me for making a very obvious point, but we started by talking about all the cuts that are coming down the line and all the financial awfulness that's going to happen to us. At the same time, we're also talking about the fact that there's a lot of money sloshing around in the world, and there is an enormous amount of money sloshing around in Britain, sloshing around in Scotland. These two things shouldn't be thought of separately, and the way that they're usually dealt with is taxation. And we should be aware that just because we're in the arts doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be talking about bigger things, storming the Bastille, stuff like that, because the money that's sloshing around in the world should not be ours by begging or by philanthropy, but should be ours through taxation and proper distribution, so we can all have access to the richness of the city and the richness of arts.
Thank you, Malcolm. That's an excellent point. And of course, as people involved in culture, we're all also citizens, aren't we? And heavily involved in politics. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room would agree with your basic view. Pragmatically speaking, I have some sympathy with the council officials who are going to have to implement some sorts of cuts over the next few years. But how we got to this political point of making cuts which are fundamentally not really necessary is something that everyone here will be thinking about, I'm sure. Olaf.
James, sorry, I'm Olaf Furniss. I run Born to Be Wide, which is a community interest company that runs music business events and gatherings and also does a lot of youth events now. James, I've got a really good idea for a music tourism convention, and no one's done this anywhere in the world. Can you help me get some cash, or maybe speak to some of your pals?
Oh, yes.
Excellent. Should we have a drink afterwards?
Well, the only reason the answer to that is no is because I got to go to London. But seriously, and I find the previous question a bit troubling because, personally, I would vote for any serious policy that did pay more tax. I assure you, I don't rush for my tax abroad. I think that modern Germany is probably the best society that humanity has yet invented, and it has a much bigger idea of society than what we have. I don't see it as philanthropy. I see it as something giving back. But for sure, I can't personally do absolutely everything here. But yeah, I would try, and I'm very open to suggestions, Olaf. So thank you.
Yeah. We have before us, of course, the example of Glasgow, which has really greatly improved its entire sort of January sort of experience by having Celtic Connections, one of the best examples of kind of winter festival making in existence. Robert has got his hand up, but I'd rather have somebody we haven't heard from before. There we go. Just up the back there. Yeah. On the aisle. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Claire Daly, freelance arts fundraiser. So I'm particularly interested in sponsorship. So first thing I wanted to say is to Bailey Gifford, I think you've got a really enlightened approach, and I'd love to hear more business people speaking like that. One thing, it's a question really for James, because this is my challenge in the work that I do. As you've said, trying to get businesses in Edinburgh to invest in the arts and see the business opportunity in it. What would be two things that you would say if you're, at a networking event and trying to talk to some of your colleagues or some of your peers in saying, this is great, you should be doing this too. And I suppose the other question, and maybe it's for the arts sector, is, or maybe it's for you, James, initially, what would you like to see more arts organisations doing to meet you halfway?
Oh, gosh, no, they're great questions. I mean, I think my biggest question mark over how it's handled in most corporates, and hence how I can go about it, is that I think that people are looking for their payoffs in ridiculously narrow terms. I don't honestly think, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. I don't honestly think that we would have done any of the things that we did if we were looking for a payoff in terms of advertising or more sales or investment strategies or whatever. I think you have to think of it in much bigger, much longer terms. And I think that trying to persuade some of the people here would be better from that angle, rather than to convince them that, they're actually going to make money on their piece of sponsorship. It's an immediate payoff. From the other way around, I would just stress that, genuinely want to feel that contributing something to Edinburgh, to Scotland, to the ideas that are around, And I do think it's terribly unfortunate. It's not, you know, it's not that I feel it's different from other things in Edinburgh. It's not that we've got a complex about this. But, you know, if we're trying to involve ourselves and trying to help, then I think we need to be met halfway in that. And, you know, we're not some evil capitalists out there. You know, I hate it equally. You know, very often at the festivals, you sort of get people think you're Goldman Sachs or whatever. I promise you we're not. And I don't think most of our colleagues in Edinburgh are either.
Yeah, that's interesting, different business cultures. Pete Irvine in the front row here, and then I saw a hand at the back there, but I can't see the person underneath the hand. Right.
Hi, I'm Pete Irvine. I've been running events and festivals in Edinburgh for quite a number of years. I think Olaf asked a very good question there, but the wider question surely is, there is a great deal of corporate money in Edinburgh, in this city, and in Scotland. But there must be an awful lot of people in this room who wonder how they can get their hands on it. Because I know, and many people do know, that it's very, very difficult. So that's the wider question, isn't it? People, you know, the big festivals and the bigger companies, they have sponsorship departments and people who deal with that, but how do you actually do it if you don't? And Malcolm's point about tax, of course, is really important, but the big question always in this city that comes up, because it is about tourism and the effect of the festivals and the things that we do throughout the year is extraordinary. But the money that comes into the city comes to hotels and restaurants and all those other things, and they don't put any money back. So the question of bed tax looms again, and the answer is always, no, that can't happen. That will never happen, and it would be a wonderful thing if Edinburgh was the first city in the UK that truly did something about that. And lastly, on Celtic Connections and Glasgow and what it does, I always think that the extraordinary thing about Edinburgh that Glasgow doesn't have and other cities don't have at all is that somehow or other this city has produced creative entrepreneurs over the years who have invented all those things. The Fringe has developed first here and throughout these decades because of that. And Glasgow may appear to be the competition these days, or perhaps this year, but we shouldn't forget that most of Glasgow's events and festivals are imported, and all the festivals and events that we have here are made by us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pete. I could have asked you a lot about outdoor arts if we'd had more time in the audience section, because as Sirka was saying, one of the most interesting things about arts in public spaces is that it completely overcomes a lot of the sort of barriers that people traditionally feel. Now, there was somebody up the back there, and then I'll come to Robert, and then this session will be over, I think, almost.
Yeah, so I feel a little bit of an outcast here, because I'm generally from the tech startup community. So my name's Kate. I just wanted to echo the point about talent. So one of the, biggest issues we have in the tech community is about attracting talent, especially when we've got big companies like, really fast growing companies like Skyscanner and FanDuel, who are on course to, be billion-pound companies. And having big arts festivals is, a real attractor for talent. And I just wanted to point out, I guess, that one of the best examples of this is over in Austin, Texas, where South by Southwest has made Austin, a great city to be in, and now it's probably ranked as one of the top technology centers in the US, because people from Google or from Microsoft or from any of those big companies have gone to the arts festival, really enjoyed it, and have just decided to, invest in that city. So.
I just want to state a few useful facts. Government invests 4 times as much in the arts in Scotland as the private sector. In London, government invests only 1.5 times as much as the private sector. The amount of investment in the arts in London is 60% of all the investment in the arts in the whole of the UK. Scotland, though, unbelievably outperforms every other region outside of London several times over. Manchester is generations behind in catching up with either Edinburgh or Glasgow. Edinburgh and Glasgow taken together are the 8th most important cultural region in the whole of Europe for going out to culture, in sheer numbers. The numbers of people going out to all the arts and various things like that in Scotland equals the number of all the museum visitors in France and all the museum visitors in Italy in a whole year. That's 6,000 museums worth. However, private sector money, most of it that does go to the arts goes to London, goes to public, and it goes to the public sector. It does not go to independent arts organizations. We certainly have a job, or somebody has a job to do, to get the private sector in Scotland to even come up to the same level that is the aggregate elsewhere. And I think Baillie Gifford is an amazing exception to the rule. I don't think Baillie Gifford has knowingly ever turned down sponsorship of any literary event in probably the last 30 years, or something like that. It feels like that anyway. Fantastic. And with a proper understanding of why they're doing this, and this is not true for the generality of other private sector. But then don't forget, the arts is lucky if it's even 5% of people's charitable priorities, whether you're a private foundation or an individual or a big company. You are not high up on the totem pole. If you want to be high up on the totem pole, you really have to get together in groups, and groups have to join with other groups, and you have to be seen to be representative of something important and not just an individual one-off good idea. That would be my advice.
A bit of a thought there about unity, because when arts organisations fall out, I think Ben Twist in the middle there, yeah. Thanks, Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Twist. I run Creative Carbon in Scotland, which works on the environment and sustainability, but I've also worked in the arts for more years than I care to mention. And just a solution, or perhaps the beginning of a solution. Most of the people here today, if not all, are from the arts, and yet we've had somebody speaking from NHS Lothian, we've had somebody speaking from the business world. I'd be interested to know who from the council is not within the arts and culture bit, because I think perhaps what we need to do is bring together these groups more effectively. For some years I worked with lottery projects around Scotland, and one of the great successes of Glasgow, which has had a lot of success on the lottery projects, is the fact that it was possible to bring together economic development, regeneration, the arts, communities, a whole range of different departments there, and I think it would be very valuable. The council can't provide funding, but one thing the council can do possibly is bring together some of the different sectors, and so maybe find a way to bring those different groups into the room, the people that James is talking about, people that Linda's talking about, and so on.
Yeah, people in the arts always keen to talk about. Right, I'm going to just take one more in this session, and it's that lady with the specs there.
Caroline Barr, you've got to start getting the basics right. It took me an hour to access this meeting tonight. So, the lift isn't working. I was locked outside shouting, "Help! It's not on!" Start with the basics before you think of any of this highfalutin stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah. Issues of access. Robert apologises for the lift being broken. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't want right.
Sorry, just because Caroline's not got the mic anymore, she's just saying it's the general problem with the attitude to access, and places like Waverley Station are problematic and all the rest of it. Yeah. No, that's absolutely true, completely basic. So that's a brief insight into the processes around Edinburgh and the city economy, and I did like that kind of final thought that often in the arts, one of the ways that we become disempowered as a sector is by getting trapped in kind of either-or conversations about, oh, it's got to be the Edinburgh International Festival or North Edinburgh Arts Centre. But really, if we're looking ambitiously at a healthy city arts economy, it's got to be absolutely all of those things, I think. Now, if we're moving on to our next session, let's thank James very much indeed. We heard about Austin, Texas and its festival, and someone in the council recently said that the aim was to make Edinburgh like Austin, Texas in terms of its friendliness as a venue for music. But I think probably everyone in this room knows that there's been a great deal of discussion about the pressures on performing spaces in Edinburgh, pressures to do with noise, pressures to do with property development, pressures to do with various different kinds of regulation. So our next session is going to be about spaces for the arts in Edinburgh, and I'd like you to welcome both of our speakers up for this session, the architect Malcolm Fraser. Oh, Malcolm, have you disappeared? Oh, there you are. Good. You were very well. And the writer and critic Neil Cooper. Thank you.
Well, I counted as I came in, and there are 20 current or ex-clients in the room here, which is slightly terrifying talking to you. So I'm not going to talk about buildings, because I'd forget one of you and it'd be a problem or something like that. But I was asked the question, what makes Edinburgh a culturally successful city? And with apologies, can I say, every city has good people in it. Every city has buildings in it. The reason the biggest arts festival in the world happens here is for two reasons. One, it's a Goldilocks city. It's just the right size. It's dense. It's not too big. We don't lose it in it. It's big enough to hold it all in. But the second thing is, we have a unique urban drama here. It's geology and it's architectural spaces. So rather than talk the normal stuff about bottom up, top down, all these things, which I'm happy to go on and talk about, I wanted to very specifically remind you what is staggering about this place we live in, because the more we can connect with that, the more fantastic, place-based, extraordinary, world-class things we can do. So our geology is absolutely extraordinary, and forgive a wee geology lesson, but we were one of the most geologically active places on Earth 350 million years ago. We had an ice sheet, we had an ice age, and ice sheets came and scoured out around our old volcanoes there, and they've left a unique or a very specific geological situation in the Old Town here. And the section through the Old Town and the New Town is extraordinary, and that's the basis of what we have here that is so different and we need to cherish. And that's the drama of the place, the bridges, the suddenly being, finding you're in the air, you thought you were on the ground, stuff going on below you, crossing the bridges, the nightclubs going on underneath. That, we are a three-dimensional place. There is nowhere else in the world that has our degree of three-dimensionality. And I look at any other place and I think that I feel sorry for it compared to this extraordinary drama we have ourselves. And how we've reacted to that is quite extraordinary. That's the plan of Edinburgh. People think about the Old Town as being somehow unplanned, like it was built for tourist reasons. It was a commercial proposition. It was set out as a tax-free zone out on a hill, peopled with Flemish, French and German merchants in order to grow a tax base to save Scotland from the clan system. My name is from Norman people who came in and populated the Old Town there. And it grew up along the hill, and then it became organically very dense with this extraordinary great series of urban rooms in the middle. They're called a street. They're not a street. It's not a high street. These are the markets of Edinburgh that Edinburgh was based around. Utterly unique, elongated squares, tuned, climatically tuned for the specifics, the windy place, the high place that we are. And these are the places where the Enlightenment happened. Now, it's no accident that Enlightenment happened in Edinburgh. It's to do with Scotland's education system, but it's also to do with a social urban landscape where rich and poor, genius and commoner met in the street, in these markets, on the close, in the courts behind them. It's a product of our unique urban spaces.
And rather wonderfully, it's these exact same spaces that underpin the vitality of the festival. It's that exact ability for everyone to meet in these spaces, shake hands, talk, fall out, get engaged to, make friends in. That is what underpins the festival. That's what underpins Enlightenment. It's that exact same thing. And what we do in these spaces is fantastic. The parades we have in there, the festival events we have in there, the stuff that we do coming out of those spaces is fantastic at night. And then that works in all sorts of spaces throughout Edinburgh. These grand architectural spaces like Old College, all the courts, all the back spaces, all these spaces that nurture the festival, all the big daft things that can go on in there, all of that is absolutely critical to a place that becomes this huge social ferment. That works in the New Town too. Festival, the cinema happening in there, although my favourite cinema in Edinburgh is when they had in the forecourt of the City Chambers, when they had a cinema in there. That was a fantastic urban space. And of course the book festival too, and how wonderful that that space comes alive every year. It's also about how we use the spaces and the geology, how we walk out from those spaces. So Beltane, of course, is such a wonderful thing that demonstrated that this is a promenade city, that you could move out of those spaces, down the bridges, up onto Carlton Hill, and do all these wonderful things in there. And although I didn't say I would talk about clients, it is a fantastic thing we are doing now, working with the council and Collective Gallery, to move Collective Gallery up to Carlton Hill. I think that's a really good thing for the council to do. They're getting a lot of stick for not making it another museum, but our response to the Astronomer Royal, and to all these people that are doing that perhaps astronomy is not a backward-looking discipline. Perhaps art might demonstrate the possibilities of astronomy better than a museum would ever do. So I really like that project. Or how other spaces in Edinburgh can be articulated and used. That's the homecoming. Of course, Fringe Sunday was always great in Holyrood Park, and you have no idea how many people Holyrood Park can take. For military parades, in the 19th century, and that's 1905, up to 200,000 people could congregate in there. We need to use these spaces. We need to understand how to use these spaces more. And of course, perhaps most significantly, right up on top on the Esplanade, the Tattoo is just the most fantastic urban spectacle. And David's here, I know he'll tell us the Tattoo is fantastic artistry and military and everything like this. But it's the drama, it's the urban drama, it's the architectural drama of that space that makes it this most extraordinary thing, and how well the Tattoo actually uses all that. And of course, at night, the wonderful things we do and the wonderful way we use the city. We actually understand that. But I'd like us to think more about the nature of it so we can use it better. And then, of course, Speed of Light in Holyrood Park was the most wonderful demonstration of that. And being up there and seeing how the rest of the city was part of that drama, how it played with the planes coming down into Edinburgh Airport, everything happening in the city behind, and then suddenly this great dark carpet in the middle. These are the things that are so special to the place and work so well. And then even like Ricky DeMarco many years ago, it's not just the spaces in the city, but out in the Firth of Forth, using Inchcolm Abbey, all that sort of stuff. That's where our true unique selling point, our specialness, that's what works, and that's what we need to work more of. So in terms of then, I was asked, manifesto for culture in the city, it's really just to use these places better, to think about these outdoor spaces, to think of the sociability and the walkability of the city, its compactness, its three-dimensionality as being behind things. The city's urban drama. And I know the council is doing this, and I don't know if the guy came, Ian, I don't know if you're here tonight, Ian, but the council is doing an inventory record capacity of these spaces, and I think that's a really significant thing. We should support that. But in terms of how to do it more, I'll finish with two wee proposals, and many of you have seen these before. But on the grass market, you know, the grass market has been paved, etc., and it's some of the most boring open space that I know of. Of course, we did dance space, and after dance space, we proposed that, you know, it's not just the drinking classes that should inherit the earth. That's the most exciting thing that happens in the grass market. A wee picket fence with people drinking bad lager behind it. Is that the best the city can do? Well, we made this proposal, which was, I was told it was too imaginative, but there's dance space right outside it, an open-air dance venue for all year round, and in winter it gets frozen and becomes the skating rink. Why build this stupid plywood thing in Princess Street Gardens every year? Have that every year. Bring culture, bring people into the heart of the city, make them articulate these spaces again. And Donald's here, and we've been proposing this for many years. The success of the literature sector in Edinburgh is astonishing. That's really been a ground-up thing that's also been supported top-down by the UNESCO stuff, the Storytelling Festival. And we're still working on the idea that in these city spaces, behind these traditional courts, that we should do a Scottish Literature Quarter and then take the old remnant of Holy Trinity Church and make that an all-year-round reading venue. So it's all that sort of, what's special about Edinburgh? How can we make Edinburgh work out of reinforcing and using these things imaginatively? Thank you.
35 years ago tonight, on December the 8th, 1979, I went along to an under-18s matinee gig in a shabby basement club in a rundown street in Liverpool city centre. I was 15, the band I went to see was called Joy Division, and the club was called Eric's. To say the experience was life-changing is an understatement. A couple of years before, on the same street in an old warehouse, theatre director Ken Campbell premiered a 12-hour stage version of a sprawling science fiction novel called Illuminatus. Even earlier, Matthew Street had been made famous by another basement club situated across the road from Eric's, called The Cavern. The Cavern, of course, gifted the world the Beatles, and suddenly that one shabby street became the centre of the universe. These days, such activity would have prompted Matthew Street to be dubbed something called a cultural quarter. As it is, Liverpool's city fathers decided to fill in the space where the Cavern had been and build a car park on top, while Eric's was closed after the police raided it. The reason I'm rewinding across mine and my hometown's back pages isn't just out of middle-aged nostalgia. It's an attempt to illustrate where a city's culture comes from and how urban regeneration can sometimes be the death of it. This is highlighted in an exhibition currently running at the Fruit Market Gallery in Edinburgh by Canadian artist Stan Douglas, whose play Helen Lawrence was seen at this year's Edinburgh International Festival. Both looked in part at the world of Hogan's Alley, a rundown district in post-World War II Vancouver where a blind eye was turned to a backstreet black economy while also attracting musicians such as Duke Ellington and Miles Davis to play. Once the war was over, however, Hogan's Alley was cleaned up and ultimately demolished in the name of gentrification. This sort of thing is still happening all over the world, whether in Liverpool again, where the site of the super club Cream is about to be bulldozed so flats can be built, or in New York, where punk club CBGB's was forced to close because the people who ran it could no longer afford to pay the high rents that came with regeneration. But it's been happening far closer to home for years, whether on the site of Jim Haynes' first ever UK paperback bookshop that led to the creation of the Traverse Theatre, but was flattened so a car park could be built, or with the old bus station on New Street, which housed the original Bongo Club and which was demolished, and the land taken over by property developers who left it as a gap site for over a decade before the Carlton Gate project, as was eventually given the green light. The Cowgate fire, which destroyed several art venues, was a disaster which nobody could have foreseen. And 12 years on, at long last, we have La Belle Angèle back, and I've been inside, and it's beautiful. But above La Belle Angèle, we have brand new branches of Hotel Ibis, Café Costa, and Sainsbury's Express. 3 prime examples of the creeping homogenization of a city that's in danger of having its unique heart ripped out. The spectacular mismanagement of Edinburgh University settlement led to the demise of both the Roxy Art House and the Bristow Halls home of the Forest, both thriving grassroots ventures which grew up in the spirit of the Bongo, but which were sold to owners who only seemed to use them with any real visibility during August. Right now, the Picture House on Lothian Road is about to be given planning permission to convert this former cinema and concert venue into a super pub by Wetherspoons. This, despite some 13,000 signatories to a petition protesting the move. Meanwhile, the property developers who own the old Odeon cinema on South Clark Street appear to be letting the building go to rack and ruin until they get their own way. And last weekend, yet another Edinburgh bar cancelled its live music nights because a solitary complainer didn't like it, while the archaic notion of a zero audibility clause deemed such a move acceptable. If such a clause had been enforced in the recent past, chances are that both the Fringe and the 1960s folk revival would have been dead in the water before they'd begun. And imagine what would have happened when the late Kurt Cobain played an impromptu gig in the Southern Bar if a couple of council officers had turned up and told him to keep the racket down. And yet, still great things come out of Edinburgh, despite what seems sometimes like the best efforts to restrict, police, or just prevent artistic activity beyond its great institutions. This is the city that sired Gridiron Theatre Company, the site-specific auteurs who are now rightly regarded as one of the world's great contemporary theatre companies. The artist-run Embassy Gallery has just celebrated its 10th anniversary, while down the road, the Rhubarbar art space is similarly thriving in a Leith brought to glorious life during Leith Late. Then there is Young Fathers, the Edinburgh band who won this year's Mercury Music Prize and who met at an under-18s hip-hop night in the Bongo Club. Since winning the Mercury, Young Fathers have been vocal about the noise laws in the city, which everyone knows has been a problem for years. A grassroots spoken word scene led by nights such as New Reekie and Raleigh and Broad are making waves around the country. So it's great the Edinburgh Book Festival is already recognising that scene in Edinburgh through their Unbound season of Sunday nights in August in the Spiegel tent. But those nights have their roots in the sort of nights New Reekie co-founder Kevin Williamson used to put on with his seminal magazine Rebel Ink in the back rooms of pubs and community centres. Similarly, it's vital that a novelist such as Julian Cope can be embraced by the book festival. But if he and his band The Teardrop Explodes hadn't found a platform to perform in a shabby basement club in Liverpool called Eric's 35 years ago, he might have ended up becoming a teacher, which was the original plan. So, while the institutions need cared for, art doesn't work from top-down thinking. It comes from the ground up, in back rooms of pubs and creative spaces with cheap rents where artists can make a scene. The whole city is a cultural quarter, whether you're watching a band in a bar on Leith Walk, walking up Martin Creed's steps, or wandering through the Richard DeMarco archive in this magnificent building. We don't need to look to Austin, Manchester, or Glasgow for advice on how to do things. All those cities do wonderful things in their own special way and out of a particular set of social, economic, and political circumstances, but so does Edinburgh, and we have all the expertise we need in this room right now. This isn't about money, because everyone here knows that if there isn't any, it's sometimes the wrong people who get it. This is about developing a will to do great things, and rather than being seen to put obstacles in artists' paths, to enable them. And through that will, the city needs to learn to say no to property developers and breweries and to protect its existing cultural assets by annexing the art centres, bars and grassroots spaces and asset locking them so they can't be turned into one more branch of Sainsbury's Express. Over at the Traverse tonight, photographer Alan Macready is launching his book, 100 Weeks of Scotland, a collection of images taken from across the country over the 2 years leading up to this year's referendum on independence. In a pub in Leith, Paul Vickers, the singer with the band Paul Vickers and the Leg, as well as a comedian and stalwart of the Free Fringe, is running a pub quiz in a way which I suspect will more resemble a surrealist performance art. On BBC Six Music, a band called the Sexual Objects, led by a man called Davy Henderson, whose musical roots go back to Edinburgh's world-changing post-punk scene with his band Fire Engines, who formed after seeing the Clash's White Riot tour at Edinburgh Playhouse and are now cited by the likes of Franz Ferdinand as a major influence, are playing a live radio session. None of these artists needed official approval for what they're doing, nor were they part of any strategy. And yet, 100 Weeks of Scotland has already caught the national imagination. Paul Vickers is planning to take his new show to the Prague Fringe next May, while the Sexual Objects are about to release a new album that might just prove to be the record of the year. All of these artists just did this stuff because they wanted to, they needed to, and in the context of tonight, they desired to. And that's exactly how it should be. As the Clash's Joe Strummer said long after he played at Edinburgh Playhouse, the future is unwritten. It's up to everyone here to make that future be written the way we want to.
Well, fantastic, rousing stuff. And it's perhaps indicative of the city that Edinburgh is, that when we start to talk about the specifics of the police and the places, suddenly you can feel everybody's energy kind of rising, because it is a remarkable piece of urban geography, as Malcolm said, and as Neil said, full of places with a fantastic creative history that are often despite rather than because of any particular thing that the city fathers at any given moment might have done. However, you know, we're in a moment of particular crisis over certain venues and all the rest of it. So any responses from the audience to any of that? Yep, in the back there.
Good evening. Ian Pettigrew, freelance musician. I'm just going to enlarge briefly on the point that my friend Neil introduced. The theme of today's meeting is what makes Edinburgh a culturally successful city. I'm asking what makes Edinburgh such a dreadful place for musicians in small venues. My accusing finger points at the City of Edinburgh Council. How can a council that claims to support our cultural festival city also be summarily killing live music at its grassroots? Double standards here, I suspect. For too long now, the Licensing Standards Office has been stifling the city centre live music scene in the smaller pubs by summary draconian actions that they seem to make up as they go along. How and why do they do this? They respond to a single uncorroborated complaint from a neighbour of the said premises who can simply hear the amplified music from his or her dwelling. To hell with the traffic, the drunks fighting, etc. We're not talking excessive noise here, but merely the music is audible. So if Mr. Angry from the Old Town, who lives 50 metres from, say, the Southsider pub, can just about hear the opening bars of Sweet Home Alabama, but he has to switch off his fridge, perch on top of his wardrobe, and put a tumbler to his ear against the wall, the LSOs will support him, and in they go. Any LSOs here tonight? There's a surprise. Yeah, they'll all be out killing music. Does a pub become a bad place just on the say-so of one single, embittered, uncorroborated complainer? Do the LSOs take into account, and of course with the LSOs I'm also referring to the licensing board, do they take into account the other 80 or so people who live in the same block as Mr. Angry and didn't complain? Is there a consensus of opinion that this is unacceptable, like a nuisance neighbour from hell? What about the other stakeholders? The bar staff that are laid off early, the musicians themselves, the appreciative audience, music shops, promoters, indeed the PRS. It's been pointed out to me that a council who talks about providing larger music venues seem to be pulling the plug on locally based musicians who have to rise through those levels back to grassroots. My concern over this issue prompted me to start the Facebook group, Keep Music Live Edinburgh. Please take a note of that and join us. We're over 100 strong and growing. We represent a wide spectrum of opinion, not just pubs and aggrieved musicians. We are also, petitions have been raised against this single complainer nonsense across the UK. And it's maybe time that the council looked at, for example, the agent of change policy that they have in Australia. Times have changed, I'm summing up now, times have changed and we as musicians are now generally better behaved. Gone are the days of the huge amps, the Marshall stacks, other brands of amplifiers are available, and speaker stacks, WEM Dominator, massive PA systems, Black Sabbath covers been blasted out at ear-splitting volume. This trend is not good news for drummers. Some of them have downsized, like my own band, taken up the cajon, acoustic instruments through small amps, and PA systems that can easily perform below 80 decibels.
Ian, can you...
Just summing up now.
I think there's a few other people.
Challenge to the council, stop entertaining the single complainers. Can we work together to coexist to everyone's mutual understanding and benefit? Thank you.
Great, thanks. There's already, of course, been a big live Music Matters session at the Usher Hall a couple of weeks ago, which I hope will be in many ways linked to this session in terms of trying to produce solutions to this issue. But certainly that is a kind of caricature of overreaction to noise complaints, which has been going on for a long time. Now, Norma from Edinburgh Council. Hello. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Joyce. And I'm very, very conscious of the sensitivity around this matter. I'm the Vice Convener of Culture and Sport in the City of Edinburgh Council, and so we were responsible for pulling together the Live Music Matters event that Joyce has just referred to. And I just want to briefly mention what's come out of that so that the audience has an idea that we aren't ignoring this issue. First of all, we are going to set up a music forum. And anyone here who is involved in the music industry and wants to be involved in this open forum, please let me or someone from the council, there are several officers here, Carl's at the back there, David Williams is here as well at the back, let us know and we'll add you to the database. You will get invited to the forum as it progresses. The main aim of the forum is to consult, to engage, to listen, facilitate, and try and pull together some responses to the problems that have been coming up. Particularly, though, we are going to set up a group to deal with the noise thing. It's going to be called Music is Audible. We are going to have representatives from the licensing people, the planning people, and one of the things that we're going to look at is how the agent of change principle that Neil mentioned, how that applies in Scotland. We need to investigate to see how we could make that work if at all possible. We're also going to look at better mediation. On top of that, we're going to look into something called a register of community assets, which is something that is happening in England. It would require all venues in Edinburgh that currently have some kind of performance. If that venue is to be sold by its owner, there would be a requirement for consultation with the local community on their views on what the change of venue could mean, so that it wouldn't be able to be sold without that view being taken. It's called a register of community assets, and it will work alongside the new legislation that's coming in for community asset transfer. Quick summary of where we're at.
Thanks very much. That's really useful, Norma. On the noise thing, though, is it not basically just a management problem? I mean, clearly there's some code of behaviour going on in the noise abatement department, which is, to put it mildly, reacting excessively to single complaints. I mean, you can take things into account without acting on them immediately and closing things down.
Okay, I'm going to be very delicate around this. The council's between a rock and a hard place on many of these issues. All I can suggest is that we are going to look at ways of being more flexible and more sensitive to the problem from both sides.
I think we also need to know that the council, the establishment, is looking after small venues too. I mean, the loss of the Picture House is a catastrophe. I used to play in a famous Edinburgh post-punk band, and I know what a terrible venue that is too. You can't do get-ins there. I mean, there is an underlying problem with the Picture House, and in a way, it's not so much that it's gone, it's that it has to be replaced, and we really need to be hearing that our council is trying to find somewhere else, is trying to be an enabler. We too often hear that the council wants a kind of SECC, the big things, the big venues. We need to understand that it's the small things. Edinburgh's not a huge city, and it actually should be that medium-sized and small-sized things we want to know the council is nurturing too. So I don't know if, I would hope that behind the scenes you are concerned and that you need to be looking and working with places like this, other places, to try and find places where we can tuck really good small, medium-sized venues in Edinburgh to do that nurturing thing.
Yeah.
TV 21.
Yeah, and Neil also mentioned the old Odeon in Clark Street, which is a very sad tale and a beautiful building with kind of Art Deco elements and everything. I'm just going to let this session run on a little wee bit because we've had two speakers. Lady in the middle there, can't see who it is, and then Douglas Robertson there, who has his own tale to tell about being shut down by the council.
Hi Joyce, it's Rachel. Hello. And I'm going to speak from sort of two angles here, one of which is Rallying Broad, thank you very much for the name check on that, Neil, and one of which is the Forest Cafe, which is sort of the other big love of my life. The reason that Rallying Broad was able to come about, for those who don't know, we run a mixed art form cabaret specialising in spoken word and live music monthly in Edinburgh and also now in Glasgow. We're into our third year. We've been lucky enough to have Creative Scotland funding and we like it very much. We're now at the Bongo Club, we used to be at the Counting House. The reason that Rallying Broad was able to come about was because there is a thriving grassroots spoken word scene in Edinburgh. Spoken word doesn't suffer in any way from a lack of facilities for rehearsal, of studio facilities. It's something that can really be developed in someone's bedroom and in pubs, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's been able to thrive so much. My argument with this then would be, or my question about making Edinburgh a culturally successful city would be looking at maintaining and opening up those spaces where artists can go to practice and to learn and to develop and to fail and get better and sort of go on to do the bigger things and do that organically. And it's places like Forest and Forest Centre Plus that are doing that, and places like the Bongo Club as well, and opening up things like that. I was talking to a poet from Newcastle recently, and Newcastle is, I'm sure you'll know, in a really bad way for arts funding. At the minute, their budget has just been slashed. But the council has a policy of encouraging arts organisations to go into empty buildings, even temporarily, to run events, to set up things like that. I live near Toll Cross. I was looking around there the other day, and there's at least 4 or 5 empty shop fronts, which are just sitting there. And I would like to see those spaces opened up as whatever it is, pop-up shops, as performances, as spaces where people can go and work and experiment all year round.
Hello, Douglas Robertson, run house concerts in my house for the last 12 years. Recently set up a Soundhouse organisation to try and form a non-profit making musician-led venue in Edinburgh. We're not really finding a building yet, but that's another thing. First of all, I'd like to thoroughly agree with the comments of Neil Cooper. I think what has to be stated is for a healthy musical scene to exist in a city, it has to be healthy at all levels. I mean, and you can call the kind of pub gigs almost entry level, you know, the first step on the ladder for a lot of young musicians. You take those away, and the kind of draconian policies of Edinburgh Council, which are unlike any other city in Europe. There is no other city in Europe that has inaudibility as the measure of acceptability for live music. Only Edinburgh. When you take away that level of activity, then you move up into the small venues situation. A couple of them were mentioned, but there are plenty more. The venue is now the Ingleby Gallery. You know, the Lot closed down. I mean, you could go on forever about the small venues that used to exist in Edinburgh and don't anymore. So I think the very fact that this kind of section of the discussion has been almost hijacked by music is indicative of the fact that there is a massive crisis in the music business in Edinburgh. I think there's very little doubt about that, and it's generally recognised that we needn't look to Austin, Texas, and Toronto and a number of other places. We just have to look at Glasgow, where there are a very healthy set of small venues, where, you know, some that are relatively new, many that, like King Tut's, that have existed forever and are still there, whereas in Edinburgh there's virtually nothing. The problem we faced with the council, because 2 years ago we had an enforcement notice put over us about the house concerts. We've chosen to largely ignore that because, you know, what we're doing is good and right, and it's popular with our neighbours. There isn't a problem. The problem that we had was the elected officials, Norma, Richard, and so forth, may be very well intentioned, but their hands are tied. What you have is the non-elected officials in licensing, in planning, who seem to operate completely autonomously of the elected officials. We think we elect people who represent us, but those people are actually are unable to influence decisions made by the planners and the licensing people, who basically make subjective decisions about one thing and another. So therein lies a problem. Something has to be done whereby the elected officials who represent us make the decisions, and not the full-time officials paid for by the council.
Thanks, Douglas. I'm just going to bring Neil in again briefly, because you know, the question of the music scene in Edinburgh is a complex one, and I know that there are different views of just how good or bad it is. So just finally, Neil, where do you think the music scene is actually at the moment? Is it a crisis, as Douglas said?
I don't think it's as bad as advertised. I mean, it's fractured in that there are a lot of little scenelets, as it were, some which get more attention than others, and some which you know about if you're involved in that. But you know, Edinburgh's kind of always worked like that because it's never had the same continuous infrastructure as Glasgow. I think that's part of a problem where the dots aren't being joined in the best way that they could be, I think. But there's plenty of activity going on. I mean, next weekend in Pilrig Church, coming weekend in Pilrig Church Hall, Eagle Owl are presenting a musical of Dune, of Isaac Asimov's Dune. I mean, which, like, you know, there's stuff like that going on at grassroots level. People are being creative. You know, there's plenty going on, but you just need to go dig a bit more to find it, I think.
And actually, I mean, one of the issues that you always face with cultural planning is that diversity and being kind of against, you know, the culture or the structure is often quite a positive element in the development of a scene. So, you know, the fact that we don't have a continuous infrastructure maybe means that sort of scenelets can develop in cricket clubs and places. Malcolm, do you want to have a final word? Because I'm going to wind this session up now.
Rupert, do you want to go first, or I?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, this is a point specifically addressed to this session, but thank you. Yeah, so I'm Rupert, I'm Artistic Director here at Summerhall, and so yeah, I'm going to start by addressing a particular point and then make a general point about space on the back of it, but the particular point is with relation to the lady who had difficulty getting in here, which is an absolutely massive shame, and I'm very sorry that happened at all, in particular tonight, but that's, yeah, really goes against what we're striving for here. We have actually been working extremely hard to make the space more accessible. As you can see, just from being here, those of you who haven't been here before, it's a very particular building with very particular challenges, and we've been working with various disabled arts organizations to help that sort of process take place. And one of the things we're seeing in that process is how open-minded a lot of them are about what they're willing to take on and what they can enjoy as a result. A really memorable example was a performance we had in a space here, which is called the Small Animal Hospital. There is a space here that used to be the Animal Hospital for Edinburgh, and it still looks like it. Looks like the set from a horror movie. And we had a performance which was recalling the asylums of 19th century France. And in that performance, we had a wheelchair-bound performer sitting in one of the cages of the Small Animal Hospital. And it was incredibly brave of that performer to take on that challenge and that space. But in doing so, they created a moment that was incredibly powerful and that was only possible from working with an existing space. And that takes me on to the sort of general point I want to make in response to both Neil and Malcolm's brilliant presentations on space here, because there is such wonderful, such a wonderful built environment here in Edinburgh. We know how pressurized it is by property prices and by, you know, the demand for all kinds of new developments. But it just seems to me that for the arts, one of the things which various of the comments have made clear is that they tend to prosper when things are adapted, when things come out from what is already there. That's when they're natural. And I think in terms of policy, as we think about spaces, the comments that have been made about putting aside space from what's already here are really, really valuable. Sometimes it's tempting to think what we need is a big, new, shiny X and spend 10x on it. But actually, if we can be smart about using what we already have and adapting that, it will be more efficient, use the strengths of Edinburgh that exist, and create extra energy as a result as well.
We desire our spaces.
I think it's very interesting. We shouldn't be afraid of change, and change happens and we move. I don't think we should feel that because some spaces have closed in Edinburgh there's some sort of crisis. I take the point about the small music venues and their importance, but you know, I got the Roxy, it's planning permission, Roxy's closed. This place is wonderful, it's bigger. Out the Blue moved from New Street. I got them planning permission at the Drill Hall. I'm working with them in other places, quietly behind the scenes. There's tremendous potential. I don't think that our sector has shrunk. I think that there is wonderful things happening. The thing that worries me most at the moment is Edinburgh Palette at St Margaret's House. You know, if the developers take back that space, what happens to that fantastic thing they've done? Very much like Louise and Edinburgh Contemporary Crafts. There are important things happening and there are big things happening. Change is inevitable, and artists, you have been good at working with it. That's what actually feeds into what you do, and we should welcome it and ride with it, as well as trying to hold on to the things that are particularly important to us.
That's great. Right, Jen, I can see you and want to talk about Discover 21 and St Margaret's House, but can I bring you in the next session when we talk about theatre and stuff? Yeah, great, because we're really a bit over time now, and it's definitely time for our 10-minute comfort break. But I am literally going to keep it to 10 minutes, because we still have a lot of ground to cover. After the interval, we'll hear from Olaf Furniss of Born to be Wide, Morvern Cunningham of Leith Late, and Caitlin Skinner of the Village Pub Theatre. So looking forward to that, and then we'll hear from all of you. We're going to begin with Olaf, who is the director of Born to be Wide, in Edinburgh's great social get-together of people in the music industry. Olaf.
Okay. The microphone worked first time for me. So I'd just like to say, Ian, you're a complete and utter bastard for articulating my entire presentation in your earlier intervention. But what I'll do is, I'm sure you know the message has been kind of rammed home pretty decisively. But so what I'll try and do is batter through this quickly, and then maybe move on to some ideas that I've got more towards the end, which aren't really in the presentation, but I did allude to them earlier, and it's actually about the whole aspect of music tourism and how you can take advantage of that as a city. As I say, it's not really in here, but then I can just kind of make it up as I go along. It wouldn't be the first time. So I thought it was quite a presumptuous title where music was concerned, and I think that it was something that I tweaked slightly, because here we have how can we make Edinburgh a culturally successful city, and this is where music's concerned. And I've added this and save cash at the same time, because particularly where popular music's concerned, there is no drain on cash. There is no requirement for cash from the council. All we're really asking for is a level playing field and for some consistency. So I thought this would be a good point to start. It was alluded to in Neil's talk, but I thought my pal Graham from Young Fathers, who was quoted in The Guardian, and then the Evening News picked it up 5 days later, always ahead of the game, they ran this quote, and I think that this is one perception. I mean, the whole class thing was touched on earlier, the whole way of access, getting access to music, all of those, and culture in general. All of these points have been made, but I think this is quite interesting, because I happen to know where one of his bandmates lived, and I know that he also had a lot of problems, sometimes complaints even being made when he wasn't home. And I tell you what, music's the last thing that that's going to be your problem in terms of noise and interruptions in the Cowgate. It's like a war zone, thanks to all the different hen nights and stag parties and everything else in that neck of the woods. So it goes back to the thing, what do you prefer, bevying and hen nights or a bit of music? So I'd no idea what gave him the idea for that quote, but here's perhaps a couple of suggestions. This is a church just around the corner from my house. They just here, I've got this red button. Here, they built some luxury flats. One guy complained about the bells, and so there's no more bells. A church that's been there for 200 years. This is the Queen's Hall, right? Have a look at this. This apparently offended someone. Where's the other bit? That offended someone. And as a result, the Queen's Hall has been locked in an unnecessary legal battle because of one complaint. Now, I wish my complaints were taken seriously, because I have these fucking things all around my neighborhood, right? At least this one's got a bit of creativity here, bit of creativity in action. But as for the rest of them, the excuse that's used for the Queen's Hall is that, in fact, it's a listed building. Well, every single one of these buildings is listed. So where's the consistency there? You know, it would all be well and good if it weren't one rule for property management companies and another rule for charities that run venues. So here's the picture house. I mentioned the point that one person can lead to all this hassle with the Queen's Hall or other venues. But then take this as a contrast. Almost 13,500 people signed this petition. Now, I realize it's a slightly different case. The Mama Group, they couldn't afford to keep it as a business, or they needed a cash injection, so they flogged it. But what could we have done? Well, the agent of change principles been mentioned, and it is a money-saving idea, and I'll tell you for why. Because we pay for the resources to harangue the Queen's Hall. We pay for the resources to take legal action against creative businesses, and that comes out of our council tax. And I think that's a point worth making. Very often the council is presented as something that's some kind of foreign body. It's alien to us, but it's not. It's our representation, and really it should be regarded as that. I mean, Scotland has some of the largest councils in Western Europe, so sometimes you can feel disconnected from it. But I think it's really worth making the point that these things are actually there to serve us. So the agent of change principle, really straightforward. If you move above a pub, someone moved in above a pub around the corner from my flat where the Ramones once had a party, had a peppercorn rent, and nevertheless was able to cause all sorts of problems there. So if you don't like it, go and live somewhere else. Don't move in next door to a pub. By contrast, I can totally understand why someone who has to get up in the morning didn't want to have loads and loads of noise in a venue that had just been opened. So, you know, the same rules should apply. Being even-handed about this, I can be reasonable. Now, a cultural idea I've got is list a building for its cultural worth. And why should it only be about architecture or of a particular historic interest? I think in that respect, if you take something like the picture house, it is a cultural worth, and therefore the change of use should have come into it, and there should have been some kind of protection. That might have saved the venue, which is, or has already been mentioned, is now the Ingleby Gallery. That, by the way, was the developer. It was cheaper for the developer to buy the venue and close it down than to do all the soundproofing that was required to build flats next door. So really the problem we have is that we have a lot of willing people in the council. I've been following this for well over a decade, some very, very sincere people. But you have, as Douglas mentioned, unelected representatives who have nothing to lose by pursuing these complaints. So it's really a case of the tail wagging the dog. So that should stop. And once we have that, and I think it's really important that this has to happen first before we start talking about investing lots of money into the former Social Security Office, commissioning reports for all kinds of different cultural things. What we really need is just some common sense. And I think that I've articulated those things. And then from there, we can then go on to building on what we already have. For locals and visitors, because the two aren't mutually exclusive, we've got great musicians in this city, as Neil's already mentioned. We've got some really good venues of all different types. We've got great record shops. You can take that for granted, but the reality is there's lots of cities that don't actually have any record shops at all. We've got some amazing ones. And we've got some great professionals. The know-how in the music business in Edinburgh is immense. And it's not just from the locals. There's a lot of people who have moved here, including the producer of the most successful British album ever, Owen Morris, who produced Oasis's second album and various other huge successes. So anyone like Susie and the Banshees, Steve Severin lives here. You've got all sorts that are actually settling in the city. So the professional infrastructure exists. It's really just a matter of building on it. And what I'd say with the music tourism, we could really easily take all sorts of measures. So the next time one of our artists wins an award, instead of saying that the city's shit and is basically here to serve a bunch of middle-class wankers, we have a musician that says, this city nurtured me, this city made it possible for me to develop musically, and I love Edinburgh. That would be really nice, because I love Edinburgh too.
Thanks. Is that what Young Fathers said about after they won their Mercury? Yeah, they said Edinburgh is shit. It's full of middle-class wankers. Definitely true. Right. Not entirely full, though, as we know. Thank you. Caitlin Skinner of Village Pub Theatre, everyone.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for having me here. My name's Caitlin, I run the Village Pub Theatre, which is, I suppose, one of these grassroots arts projects we've kind of been talking a little bit about. We perform short plays in the back room of a pub called The Village in Leith. We've been doing it for about 2.5 years, and the work is always accompanied by cake. It's a project that's evolved quite organically, mostly, I suppose, by the collective of artists involved. I think the cake probably comes just because playwrights quite like cake. And from there, it's kind of starting to grow a little bit, and we're really enjoying what we're doing. But for us, it's the most natural thing in the world to be making theatre in the back room of a pub. But all the time, I keep hearing from audiences and people we talk about the project, I love your project, this is a great night, it's amazing it's happening in Edinburgh. It's brilliant, this is happening in Edinburgh. Why is it strange that we should be making work in the back room of a pub in Edinburgh? Why should a city that's known for its massive fringe festival, be surprised that there's fringe work going on? So I suppose I want to talk a little bit about how the city supports that work, what are things that are good about it, and I suppose the things I think the city could do better to support people who want to make work down here on the fringe, with no money, with local artists, and on the smaller scale, and with probably a more affordable ticket price. So I suppose, first of all, Edinburgh has its amazing institutions, and for theatre anyway, those are hugely supportive of artists like myself making fringe work, offering in-kind support, advice, mentoring, hugely beneficial. Multi-purpose venues, such as the one we're in, where we've got different art forms coming in, are huge for grassroots fringe work. It's a fantastic platform. We get to share audiences. Those are fantastic. It's definitely a strength. And lastly, we have these audiences who are hungry for the work. It's great. The fringe work is happening in Edinburgh. But why is it a surprise? Why are these audiences so hungry? Why are they looking for it? I suppose one of the things I think the city could do better at for us is about space. So we just talked a lot about that. For theatre makers, space is huge. It's kind of all you need sometimes to get something happen, to make something happen, is a place that's affordable, free, and that's really challenging in Edinburgh. It's really hard to find somewhere that's affordable, and rents are high and running an arts organisation is expensive. It's difficult to give your space away for free or for nothing. I understand that. But I think there is also a kind of cultural problem in that our pubs, our restaurants, our hotels, because of the festival, are used to making money out of artists. So we're really lucky and we have a good relationship with our pub, and there are lots of places that are doing that, but often I think when artists go to those venues, they're kind of used to being able to charge what they like, and they expect to be able to do that the rest of the year. So I suppose I'd quite like to see a cultural shift, or maybe an incentive for public spaces, private spaces, to be able to give something over to fringe artists. I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like it could have such a significant impact on this scene, which is still quite small in a city where it really probably shouldn't be. Also, I think a lot of, certainly in Scotland, the arts organisations which maybe have a remit for supporting artistic development, for supporting new work, new artists, are based in Glasgow. And that train fare is really expensive. So while we've got institutions who are really open and supportive and helpful, do they have a remit? If they change their mind about wanting to support us, will those opportunities disappear? And will we all have to go and live in Glasgow? And I suppose thirdly and lastly, we're very good at the big bang, the big one-off, the big project. But like a lot of people have been talking about, once you start something from the grassroots, it often comes from a period of frustration, from having nothing. And so lots of people get together and they do something because there was nothing before. But then where do you go? It's kind of quite a long way. And what's in the middle? So I'm wondering about what are the ways that we can support something that's come up from the grassroots into something which is sustainable and which can keep going. Because that feels like a really long jump for us. Yeah, that's it. Thanks very much.
And now, Morvern Cunningham of Leithlate. Morvern.
Thank you very much. Let me just get my bits of paper in my pocket. Give me a second. So thanks very much, everyone. When I first heard about the Desire Lines event tonight and about the kind of cultural policy revamp that the City of Edinburgh Council is undergoing at the moment, I was really excited about the possibility and the opportunity it posed for Edinburgh's creatives to really feed into policy making that will directly affect what it is we do in the future. I was also doubly keen that grassroots arts activity be represented alongside the more established arts venues and organisations in this conversation, as I feel that it's almost more crucial that their voices, our voices, are heard and reflected in future policy making at a ground level. So thanks for inviting me to speak tonight. I myself run a Leith-based grassroots arts organisation called Leithlate. We're responsible for a number of public art initiatives in the Leith area, as well as an annual multi-arts festival across multiple venues. In the last 4 years, we've showcased the work of over 100 artists, musicians, poets and filmmakers across a variety of local and unusual Leith spaces, whilst promoting the image of Leith as a centre for creativity at the same time. I think there's been a general consensus that it's a centre for creativity tonight. It's also worth mentioning that it's an area of Edinburgh which has traditionally not received a great deal of council support when it comes to cultural investment, and of course has been a victim of the trams fiasco. Back to Leithlate though, the Leithlate event itself is really realised each year by a small, hard-working team of folk who dedicate their time and effort because they believe in what we're doing and what we're achieving, as opposed to any kind of monetary benefit, which is often the case with any grassroots endeavour. I believe that grassroots arts activity is vital to any thriving cultural scene, and that it in fact acts as an indicator of a city's cultural health. It's a reflection of the confidence of an area's artistic community and contributes to key cultural objectives, including community engagement with the arts, opening up underused spaces to act as sites to explore new ways to present work to audiences, and often it provides the initial crucial platform for emerging artists and practitioners. Influence isn't just propagated at a ground level either. Well-run and ambitious grassroots activity can provide inspiration to established organisations on many different levels, including ways to liven up their regular programme and to enhance audience development. In some ways, it could be said that Edinburgh's grassroots practitioners have been operating in spite of their environment of late. After all, it was grassroots activities such as poetry readings in bookshops, in-store gigs in record shops, art openings of all kinds, and as well as larger kind of grassroots festivals such as Leithlate that were directly under threat by the public entertainment licensing legislation that was implemented in 2012. Thankfully, at that time, the artistic community galvanised and opposed the blanket changes that were going to be imposed upon us, which thereby shielded grassroots activities generally from this potentially crippling legislation. However, I feel that at that point, no word was then made of what was really needed and required from the powers that be, which was the empowerment of the grassroots cultural community in Edinburgh and the necessary support mechanisms put in place to encourage and nurture grassroots activity for the future. This support could come, I mean, if not financially, let's face it, we're not in a good state currently and in the future, in the form of an informed understanding of the needs of Edinburgh's cultural community. Examples such as one gatekeeper as opposed to many, additional frameworks of support such as reduced rents for properly constituted not-for-profits and arts charities, alongside the removal of red tape when it comes to producing grassroots activity. Personally, it's been said already tonight, I would like to see more support from the council when it comes to occupying disused and empty spaces in the city, as it doesn't seem that there are any difficulties at the moment opening up these spaces in August in what looks like an enlightened approach to Edinburgh's venues and cultural activity that isn't currently being replicated throughout the year. A more open approach in general when it comes to dealing with grassroots organisation would be welcome. Perhaps even a how-to manual could be produced by the council on how to get the necessary permissions, insurance and other necessities for pop-up shops and gigs to take place in the capital, specifically from the point of view of these official gatekeepers. Much in the same vein, perhaps, as the recently produced Don't Make a Scene, a field guide to putting on DIY gigs. I've brought my own copy here, compiled by Rob St John and Bart Owl, who I know is in the audience. Please bother him. I think they're all sold out, but there might be a few reprints coming. And in general, just thinking of a way forward, I feel that we need to be inspiring and empowering the current and next generation of creatives to go out and put on a variety of grassroots events in the city, both large and small, making it easy to put on an exhibition in a shop or a gig in a church hall. And by doing that, we'll be helping to ensure that the future of the Edinburgh art scene is in rude health. Thank you.
Hello? Yeah, yes, I've switched it off, sorry. Thank you all very much. That was absolutely fantastic. Olaf, you were jumping up and down at something that Caitlin said, I think. Do you want to?
Yeah, it really struck a chord. I mean, we've had people from all over the world come and speak at our events. Just for those of you who don't know, we started off just as a social night for the Edinburgh music scene by inviting people to come and DJ. They could play anything they liked except anything by the Smiths or Joy Division, Neil. And basically that developed into something bigger. We started doing panels. We then launched a convention called Wide Days with a showcase element where several bands went on to get signed. Two of them have actually made it into the top 20 in the Scotsman yesterday or today actually. So the point that I really chimed with me. People come from Glasgow. People come from all over Scotland to attend our events, and there's always this kind of thing. Oh, if they're not saying you should be doing this in Glasgow, they're saying, how come you're doing this in Edinburgh? And it's like, well, why wouldn't I? You know, this is where I live, and people actually, believe it or not, really want to come and speak here and take part in events. It's an easy sell, and I think that what really want to come back to one point you made, Morvern. I think that friends of mine who are based in Glasgow do an amazing multi-venue event. They go from place to place, and they've done it all around Scotland. They finally, after years and years, got a sponsor. and they had it lined up for Edinburgh, making use of really some quite unusual spaces in the city for pop-up gigs during the daytime. So you think about all the noise during the daytime. They were lucky enough to get covered in the evening news, at which point someone from the council picked up on it, threatened them with arrest if they went ahead with the event, and the whole thing had to get pulled. And one of the people involved in it is Ali McRae from Radio 1. I mean, someone who's, until recently from Radio 1, but someone who's really well known. It's, you know, it should be celebrated that he wants to come and do something in our city. And instead, the whole thing had to be cancelled, and they lost their sponsor. And what you have to understand is that with the grassroots, it takes years to build up to an event like that. You know, we've done 5 wide days, and this year we broke past 150 ticket sales. But it took 5 events to reach that. And it's so easy for someone to come in and just crush that creative entrepreneurship. And I think that's where there really needs to be some kind of accountability with these unelected government officers, because whilst people are creating stuff and making this incredible scene, it's so easy for someone who has no comprehension of what's involved behind those scenes to make it happen, to just snuff it out.
Right, now, before I come to the rest of the audience, which I can't see at the moment anyway, I'm going to ask Jen McGregor to say a few words in the front row with the red hair for the microphone person. Because Jen, somebody earlier mentioned St Margaret's House, which is the big brutalist block out along London Road, which currently has an arts centre in it. It's really has a little theatre and space called Discover 21, which Jen's involved in.
I don't, am I making noise? Yes. Yes, awesome. Yeah, sorry, hello.
No, I don't think that microphone.
Am I?
Is it? Okay.
I can project, if you like. Yeah, I co-founded Discover 21, which is a tiny little 35-seater theatre, and we've got a couple of people in common with the Village Pub Theatre, and Caitlin's already said many of the things that I would have said in the last half, so that's probably quite fortunate. But one of the biggest issues that we face as we try to formalise what we're doing is licensing and the sheer expense of it, and the fact that, you know, we're a completely self-funded operation. So we're trying to create theatre, which is not the most inexpensive of media to work in, and to bring this little room in this disused office block up to scratch for health and safety purposes, and then get it licensed, because there's a limited number of temporary licenses that we can have each year. It's terrifying, quite frankly, when you're doing this on your own money, and that's not something that you have a huge amount of to spare, to know the fines that you could face, the penalties that you could face if you get it wrong. I'm not sure if there's a way for the council to make themselves a little bit less intimidating on this, and to make us feel that we're being worked with a little bit more. At the moment, it feels more like something we have to oppose and find workarounds, which is very good for the creativity, but completely exhausting. And in terms of figuring out how to pay for things like licenses, means more time spent at the day job, means more time that I'm not actually working on my art, which seems somewhat counterproductive, because, you know, nurturing the grassroots, building up the artistic scene, get the artists doing the art thing, not the day job thing, you'd think. We are planning to start, and I'm just going to say this because, Caitlin, this might be something that you guys at Village Pub want to know about. We're about to launch an initiative to give space to artists, because while at the moment we can't give them money because we have no money, we do have a space. And we want to run a kind of incubator scheme where people can come and develop work for the sake of their own development, not for the sake of an end goal, for the sake of a project that you have to present at the end of it or feedback on. We're trying to sort of set people free from some of the shackles that go with any kind of funding that obviously need to be reported back on. It's a risk, it's an experiment, but that's what it's all about, right? So I'll let you know when that starts. Awesome.
Good initiative there. Okay, now obviously it's 9:15. We've had a longish evening, but I'm happy to take a few points from the audience on sort of general questions facing different art forms. I can see one over here.
Hi, my name is Andy Summers. I'm an architect and a photographer. I'd just like to maybe propose a possible strategy for which might help. I've been away from the city for about 12 years, and I came back last year. And without sounding patronising, what I've sort of been amazed at is what's going on here. There's so much going on. There's so many great people, organisations, cultural stuff, but it's very hard to actually access it in terms of visually. And I think visual communication could be far better in the city itself. I live down near Broughton Street, and there's a poor man's interpretation of one of the classic Parisian Art Nouveau advertising columns, and it has posters on it, because there's a lot of people who aren't on Twitter, and are mostly our audience who are in the streets. They're out in Christorphin, they're at the Gyle, they're down Leith, but there's very little visual communication in the urban realm of what's actually going on. Posters for events, screens for movies or short films. So I think as a strategy, it would be better, hopefully, if the city could talk to itself more, because I think there's a lot going on here, but it's very hard to actually see that within the streets itself.
Very much. It does often occur to me too, as someone who writes about the arts in Edinburgh, that even people who are quite engaged with particular areas of the arts often have a surprisingly low awareness of what else is happening in this city, which I think is something to do with that reaction that you've both described of imagine that happening in Edinburgh. It's like people are kind of under-aware of the kind of year-round cultural activity in Edinburgh, and I don't know if there's some exercise that even without, you know, any assistance from the council, that the whole sort of sector could do to try and, I mean, make some of Malcolm's wonderful maps, you know, with a kind of pop-up pictures of everything that's happening over a particular weekend or something, just to show people the huge range of stuff that goes on. But I often feel that even as somebody who's worked on it for 30 odd years, it's difficult for me to get a whole picture in my head of what's happening culturally here. That might be true of any city, but I certainly think it's true of Edinburgh. Any more point? Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure.
I just thought on that point, I was just going to mention that Duncan and I, we already kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, was that we are undertaking a cultural mapping research project of Leith currently. So we'll be reporting on that in April time, and hopefully feeding into the whole process with the culture policy as well. So keep an eye out for us. We'll be kind of launching officially kind of outwardly at the start of next year, and we're calling ourselves Leith Creative.
That's great. Thanks very much. Yeah, there you go. Pete again in the front row there. There we go.
Hi. Yeah, we've been talking in this session a lot about pop-up things, and there are two sort of legislations, I suppose, or two circumstances that make that very difficult, and we do pop-ups a lot too. And one is, as we've been talking about, the cost of licenses. If you have a venue between 200 and 1,000 people, you pay an awful lot of money for a license, which you really should have if you're charging money to the public. Perhaps people don't know about that, but it's going to be increasingly difficult to do anything without it. And the second bit is the more insidious and perhaps just emerging legislation, which requires us that if you're employing people at all, that is paying them to work at your event, whatever it may be, whatever low level, you have to register, they have to, they have to be on your payroll, basically, and they have to pay national insurance. And I think that extends all from the International Festival to all of the rest of us, and it makes life very difficult, especially when those people that are perhaps appearing. We did the Torchlight Procession, for example, that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time. We have loads of people helping us to marshal the audience. They're only working for a few hours, but we have to pay them a great deal more than we would normally pay them. Lots of people don't want to do that because they have to go through our books. They have to show us their passports, believe that or not, so that they're registered with us, and they have to pay NI. That makes things really, really hard. For anything that pops up for the day, or even in the case of the things that we're doing on January the 1st, which is another whole load of people for just a few hours, they have to go through the books, and they have to actually bring their passports to us. That's going to make life very difficult for a lot of us here, I think.
Thanks, Pete. And presumably that's UK legislation. It's not even Holyrood. It's what idea be Westminster? Yeah. Basic. Yeah, we should have one of those huge, giant Downing Street petition exercises and everything. Right, I'm seeing Douglas again, I think. Yeah, Douglas.
During the break, Ronnie here just reminded me, I'd completely forgotten, that one of the reasons that South by Southwest is so successful is that there's a tax placed on the hotel rooms during that festival, which goes back into the festival. It's something like a 15% hotel room tax. So as the festival grows, so does more money go back into the organisation. And that's a kind of top-down decision that could be made quite easily. It seems we in Edinburgh do almost the opposite, whereby all restrictions, all building controls, all health and safety standards are lifted to allow 2 or 3 huge organisations to kind of parachute into Edinburgh for the festival and then take the profits away back with them, the kind of assembly, underbelly kind of place who get dozens of pop-up licenses and basically, I don't think, put a great deal back into the Edinburgh economy. So I think there are a number of things like that could be looked at. Look at Ali, who runs the Bongo Club, is allowed to use 2 small spaces within a huge labyrinthine building. But the underbelly come in and are given the entire use of that entire building, while he gets thrown out during the 2 most profitable months of the year, July and August, for the prep and then the actual performances. When the festival ends and the underbelly take their money back down to London, Ali's back into those 2 small spaces again. I mean, there's a very strange sort of dual standards here, whereby what's good for those who come in is not good for the Edinburgh people. What's good for the tourists is not good for the Edinburgh people.
Yeah, I think there might be something to be done in terms of the council actually looking at the balances of benefits and, who exactly is gaining from the fantastic festivals that we have, and then certainly working that through. Of course, the bedroom tax issue has already been raised. Pete's already raised it earlier tonight, and it's under constant discussion in Edinburgh. I think one of the arguments against it is that it kind of, you would have almost to have some kind of guaranteed result. I think people would feel much happier about a bedroom tax being imposed if it was going to be hypothecated, as is the technical term, i.e. it would be ring-fenced, that the money that you got from that would definitely go back into investing in Edinburgh's cultural life and in the festivals. I mean, that's obviously quite a difficult policy decision to make when you're competing with other cities that don't have such a tax. But Edinburgh might be a case for it. Morvern, did you want to add something?
I'm just going to say that there's this amazing feeling in August that anything is possible, and why can't we have that for the rest of the year?
Yeah, and again, and the turning what you've said kind of on its head, Douglas, that actually in talking about getting a licensing framework that actually helps people to do things rather than not helping them to do it. Actually, Edinburgh City Council has a lot of experience of that, and the department which licenses for the Fringe is famed for its helpfulness and its efficiency and its supportiveness. So, it can be done. I think just importing a bit more of that mentality into the year-round operation might be a good place to start. I'm seeing, can I take John Paul from Leith Theatre and then come back to you for a last burst, Robert, since you are our host for the evening.
My name is John Paul McGroarty, and I currently am the Artistic Director Designate of Leith Theatre. I've counted the number of times the word Leith was used tonight. It's 10 times the topic has come up of my neighbourhood. I've lived in Leith for 20 years, but I've got a confession to make. I'm a Glaswegian. But we have in Leith a beautiful building, a 1932 building, which was a gift from the people of Edinburgh to the citizens of Leith when the borough of Leith amalgamated with its bigger brother up the road, and we became one civic entity. The building has been empty since 1988. I saw Yuri Lyubimov's Taganka Theatre of Moscow doing Boris Godunov in the venue, and the venue was packed with 1,050 seats, I think. Now, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I might have started a theatre company and tried to move into Leith Theatre. But we now know that that's not really viable. So what we've been doing, and this is one of the things that Joyce talks about, we're not all aware of what each other is doing. We've created a trust as a vehicle for taking on the ownership and management of the theatre. We're in the process of concluding a lease with the City Council, and that has not been easy. I'm not being critical of the council because they have granted us the occupancy of the building, and we hope to move in April. But it's just to let everyone in the room know that if you work hard, and what we've had to do is a lot of forward planning. We've had to sort of take away short-term objectives and think about productions in 2016, 2017, and 2018 so that we can see a future for our building. We also have a 200-seat studio theatre called the Thomas Morton Hall, and the issues that Pete raised means that I have to keep the capacity of the Thomas Morton Hall at 200. It could hold 300 or 400. So some of the points that are coming up tonight, and I must give credit to Joyce McMillan, because it was Joyce in The Scotsman who said that the next wave of creative energy in Edinburgh would come from Leith. And that means a new generation of artists and also a new landscape of venues. There's about 75 decent venues in Leith that are not used by the Edinburgh Fringe. It's virgin territory. And that's why there are so many artists congregating in St Margaret's and at Coburg Studios, and we think there's something like 2,000 visual artists. You'll have a number on that soon, but we think around about 2,000. Caitlin's in the Village Pub Theatre, but the Leith Festival had been pioneering the use of these venues for years. So Leith could be a cultural quarter for the city. We know there's a proposal for a museum, and there's a proposal for some other creative ventures. So I just want to tell you about that, and I'd love to come back in about 6 months' time and tell you that we have the lease and tell you what the first season's programming is going to be. So we're very positive about it, and very positive about trying to deal with the council, who have no money, but if they can hand the building over to us with a peppercorn rent, then we can succeed. And that's the Leith Theatre Trust. We're online if you want to search for us, Leith Theatre Trust. We're on Facebook if you want to like our page. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. Now, I've got a feeling we're reaching that point in the evening when people are thinking, this is all great, and if I had limitless energy and never needed to sleep, we could talk about it all night, but it really is time for a drink. So I'm thinking about beginning to wind this session up. Is there anyone else on the floor who desperately wants to get a word in? Yep, somebody over there.
It's kind of boring, actually, but I just wanted to go back to audiences and something that you said, Joyce. We've got data. There's a lot of data on audiences. People pump performance indicators into Edinburgh Council. We've got Culture Republic here. You can see Julie. They've got a lot of data. I really think Edinburgh could work more close. Edinburgh City Council would work more closely with the agencies like Culture Republic to share that information. So instead of saying, we think people aren't coming because of this, and we're not sure, and we're talking about culture mapping from lots of different places, that people could be informed about the decisions that they're making, so they're not making a punt. And I think it's really hard for grassroots organisations to access that data. Yeah. So I think a lot could be done to support that happening. What do you think, Mary? Can I pass that to you?
Grassroots artists need to engage with cash. As well as data. Data is very good, and that's great, but some cash for the people who've been spending all their hours making work would be really, really nice.
Yeah. Don't work for free is a great slogan, but if everyone abided by it, probably a lot of the activity we're talking about tonight just wouldn't happen, which is, a continuing problem, and it bears on several things that have been said tonight. Right, any of you guys got a last word that you want to get in? No, good. I'm hearing a very, very excellent silence there. Well, first of all, can I have a big round of applause for our speakers in this final... As you know, people, this is part of, but definitely a sort of independent part of, a process which does involve the City Council coming out with a new cultural strategy. But I must say I'm really, really happy to feel the kind of positive energy that's been here tonight. I think there's obviously just a huge love for the city kind of unleashed by what Malcolm said and by Neil's speech about the different venues and the fantastic histories that are there. I think there is a huge potential, a whole lot of people in Edinburgh who, given a chance to engage with the arts, to become creative themselves in the way that Linda described right back at the beginning, then become empowered to enjoy all of the other wonderful buildings and institutions that we have in this town. We have this fantastic urban space, as has been said, and we have all this vast sort of archipelago of activity. You know, some of it almost, you know, the left sort of centipede foot doesn't know what the one 100 feet away is doing, but nonetheless, huge amount of activity and excitement for anybody who is really interested in beginning to sort of map and understand all that, and for people to feel that that's happening close to them, at least in some parts of the cities. There are clearly issues, and I think of all the suggestions that have been made in our conversations tonight, the one that sort of sticks in my mind is the idea of Edinburgh Council within the framework, and I take Pete's point about national legislation and all the rest of it, which can make things difficult, but nonetheless, if Edinburgh Council was to proactively take that positive attitude that it takes to licensing for the fringe and take that attitude over into licensing of all forms of grassroots cultural activity in the city, including particularly small-scale gigs, which are important at the moment, but also the kind of activity that's going on at Discover 21, and to actually positively set itself the exercise of producing a handbook on how to make that easy, I think that could be a very important step in sort of changing the relationship between the sort of internal workings of the council and some of these types of events that we've been talking about. And I mean, clearly there are issues about space, there are issues about the image of the arts, there are issues about transition, which I thought Caitlin talked about just now very powerfully, which have to do with what happens when you get past the stage of volunteering and doing things for free. And, you know, why is the step up to the next stage so big and so impossible to accomplish? So I think that's something that a wise cultural policy would also be thinking about. And then, you know, in behind that, the even bigger issues, the one about all the money, as Malcolm put it, that is sloshing about in Edinburgh, and why it is so difficult to access that for the arts, why our wonderful speaker, James Anderson, is why there aren't 100 of him instead of just a handful in Scotland's financial and business community. And I think, you know, there has to be ways of opening up that conversation so that more of those resources become available to the cultural life of Scotland. I think there are issues about democracy, and we repeatedly hear this, and this is not the only field, actually, the arts, in which I've heard this about Edinburgh City Council, that the councillors are great and they do their best, but they basically can't get the officials to change their ways. And I think, you know, if we can kind of become a sort of bit of a democratic grassroots movement for that to change in Edinburgh, that could be extremely helpful to councillors who are really trying to represent the people. And behind all that, again, the whole cult of austerity and the culture that we're living in, which says that spending on people, their activity and their creativity is not as important as various other forms of expenditure, from bailing out the financial system to making sure that the rich don't flee the country for fear of having to pay a bit of tax. So we're living in a very complicated political structure, but I think tonight at least we've highlighted some of the key issues that we face and some of the levels at which we can begin to try and make things better, very much just a start. Now, as you all know, this Desire Lines process has been put together by a steering group, and on behalf of that steering group, Faith Liddle of Festivals Edinburgh is just going to come up and say a final word about the next steps for this process.
Hi everyone, I'm also from the Leith Trust, so I think that's 11 mentions of Leith so far. So just on behalf of the steering group, who really are simply catalysts for this process, I wanted to thank Joyce for doing a great job, really great job. Thank you. And to all the passionate and powerful contributions, both from the stage and from the floor. It's been great. And all of those
we're filming this, it's being recorded, all of those voices will feed into the process, the comments and ideas will feed into it. There's 200 or so people here tonight, but as part of the process, we want as many people as possible who are creating and who care about culture in the city to contribute their voices to this process. So please get out there, spread the word, encourage as many people to become engaged. The website is up and running now, www.desirelines.scot. We'll send out information on all of this as well. The film will be up on the site from Thursday. On Twitter, the hashtag DesireLinesEdin is trending in Edinburgh, which is great. So the conversation is out there, out and about, which is great, but we need more and more of that. And then on Facebook, /DesireLines Edinburgh, we're looking at mid-January for responses to the survey, which is online. If you don't want to do the survey and you just want to say something, there's like a place where you can stick in 100-word contributions, just off the top of your head, although we prefer something a little bit more reflected on. And what we're going to be doing is analysing that survey, analysing all the comments that have come out today. We're going to be looking at the comments and the conversations on all the social media, and we're going to be analysing all of those and feeding that into, I guess, a picture of our cultural city, and feeding that into an event towards the end of January, beginning of February, where we'll start to kind of explore that a bit further and look at how we can take those ideas forward. Now, what we're looking at here, as has been said, and what we're working on together, is the idea of a cultural strategy for our city that we can all embrace and focus our energies and resources into. But what we will also have will go beyond that, I think. It'll be about a broader understanding of who we are as a cultural community, how we connect to other communities in the city that inhabit our city, but a sense of collective creative ambition, so combined and creative ambition. And that matters in itself, as I think we've all felt here tonight, and essentially a sense of the power that we have to change things. So get your comments in, fill in the survey, and spread the word. It's absolutely essential. And thanks all for being here. It was a great night, really inspiring. Thank you.
Safe home, everyone, and keep in touch with